Dungeon Hunter. Chapters 181 to 200. Chapter 181 to 182. Saintus. Pant, pant, pant. Cough. I was going to die. The people who escaped from the forest gasped for breath. The angels stopped chasing after they left the forest. It was like they could only act within the forest. What, pant pant, happened? Kim Yong-woo wiped the sweat off his brow and asked. It wasn't possible while running away, but now the angels had disappeared so they could ask. Yoon-hai responded calmly. I saw a sword stuck in a rock. The angels seemed to be protecting this sword. What, a sword stuck in a rock? Yes, very, it was a sword that felt sacred. The words were very meaningful. If so, didn't the forest and angels appear because of the sword? Kim Yong-woo ended the talk as soon as possible. The information needed to be discussed with everyone. The story of the sacred sword discovered in the forest soon spread among the humans. Duke Martin. He always kept his eyes and ears open. He used creatures and insects to stealthily listen to the humans. The power of the Saintus will make my foresight complete. It wasn't that long ago that he had a prophecy. It had been less than a month. However, he was certain that a Saintus would appear in South Korea. The problem was that he didn't know the exact time and place. He didn't even know what the Saintus looked like. All Martin had foreseen was a woman in her 20s. Thus far, his power was incomplete. He had the ability to see the future, but was very limited in what he could grasp. That was always his complaint. In order to make his foresight complete, a god's blood was needed. God's blood. It is possible with the Saintus. A perfect example. He felt a thrill just imagining it. Duke Martin was an ambitious man. He was currently in Pandemonium's faction, but it would be different if his power became much stronger. He even thought about becoming a Grand Duke. For that reason, he started moving as soon as he had the vision. It wasn't difficult for Martin to take control of the remaining creatures. Martin stared into a crystal ball from a deep tunnel. The forest appearing is a good sign. A sign announcing the advent of a Saintus. A forest that contained a sacred sword. He heard it from humans, but the angels guarding it meant it was obviously a sign. It meant that the emergence of a Saintus was imminent. He hadn't discovered her yet, but it would happen soon. But, I can't get rid of an ominous feeling. There was something. He was frustrated because he couldn't figure out the answer. It hasn't been confirmed yet. If it is related to my death, there is nothing I can't foresee. He shook his head. No matter how uncertain his ability, it was possible to see a little bit ahead when it involved himself. In other words, he couldn't die. An existence that escapes from the principle of causality. I will be this existence on Earth. Despite his unease, he couldn't help laughing. Causality wasn't something that could be easily overthrown. And those who could overthrow it were called God. I have figured out the location of the sword. I will go there directly. He commanded all the creatures. Anyway, he made a decision. Martin pledged to take a more aggressive offense. The movements of the creatures subtly changed. The scattered creatures started to move through the forest. The fish is caught. I smirked. The creatures were moving. Martin. I was certain that he would want to secure the sword first. The sacred weapon was for the Saintus. Of course, the Saintus had the power of attract this sword. It isn't a real sacred sword, but the bait is enough. It was the lightning sword, epic, that he bought for 2,000 achievement points. It didn't have good options for an epic grade weapon, but it was suitable for imitating a sacred sword. He moved straight away. As expected, was it due to the humans? Martin was cautious. I noticed that he had ears and eyes scattered all over, but it was hard to find all of them. As expected, he was also eavesdropping on the humans. The rumors spread through the humans had an effect. Everything was as I planned. Now all that was left. I won't interfere with the sword and will search for the Saintus. Martin led the creatures, but he wouldn't expose himself. He would immediately retreat if there was danger. Of course, there was still the possibility that I could catch Martin. Once he emerged from his hiding place, I could grab him. But there was also the possibility of missing. I wanted more assurances before grabbing Martin. In order to do so, I needed the card called a Saintus. I would use the time while Martin was distracted by the sword. A Korean Saintus, there was one. I had the memories from my previous life. The Saintuses made quite a name for themselves, and I remembered that one was Korean. There was definitely one person who became an awakened quite late. Kim Yura. I nodded. It was unlikely that there would be another woman with the qualities of a saintess. Kim Yura, that was the name of the South Korean saintess. By now, she should be in her mid-teens. I roughly recalled her characteristics. It was time to meet Roy and Rose. Late in the evening, someone moved under the full moon. I opened my magic power. My dungeon master, Chrisley, have you been well? The roof of the tallest building. I smiled at the person approaching. The still-veiled Chrisley came forward and kneeled down. It isn't a very difficult job. Apart from Rose, who is a bit of a troublemaker, Roy is very trustworthy. Chrisley said with a light expression. She often looked sad after Krasla died, but she seemed to have overcome it. Roy and Rose helped heal the wounds in her heart. Roy and Rose? They are asleep. Should I wake them up? You don't need to wake them up. You and the Giran should be enough. I moved my gaze. The Giran appeared in an empty space. The horn on her forehead and 9-long tail were her trademarks. The Giran stared at me with an expressionless face. It has been a while. It seems like you can use your abilities more effectively. I have learned how to tie space together. Ho, is that possible? I came instantly because it is possible. Rather, what happened? I hadn't seen you since that first time. Her tone was filled with thorns. I had told the Giran the location of the enemy dungeons and then left. After that, she went through quite a lot. Not long afterwards, she was inundated with problems. I need to find someone. Her name is Kim Yura. She is in her mid to late teens. A woman. I didn't care. The Giran hadn't expected this and shook her head. Who is she? The person you are looking for wouldn't be an ordinary person, right? Don't worry about it. I won't harm humans. Then you will harm the demons. Is the human a threat to you? So you want to cut off the bud? It is similar, but no. No human can threaten me. There were few demons who could threaten me individually. Only an alliance could keep me in check. The Giran had nothing to say. She realized it as well. I turned around. Move covertly. There shouldn't be any rumors. If you find her, then bring her to me quietly. It needed to be done behind the scenes. I made 1 or 2 traps to catch Martin. The name of the baby angel was Hash. Tashmal had looked after the angel egg I bought, and shortly after, a cherub was born. I had trained Hash for a job. The angel's growth was very fast, so I gave Hash some special education. Hash could create a few small light spears and would continue to grow in this battle situation. Of course, Tashmal opposed this. But there was a limited number of angels that could be used as a sign. There was a possibility that Tashmal's face and magic power would be recognized, so there was no choice. However, Hash gave off a sacred feeling and his face wasn't known. He was perfect to be utilized as a sign. And the angels who guarded Hash weren't weak. The angels guarding Hash and the sword were selectively screened. I determined that it was a power that could pressure Martin. But it was a number that would allow Martin to make an attempt. These actions were designed to attack Martin and to make him take a bite. Martin was watching the situation from a distance. It is an obvious sign. The angels and high-class creatures are keeping each other in check. Gigantes, the griffin and the hydra. Even Martin couldn't easily touch the 3 creatures. It was impossible not to receive heavy damage. The hydra was especially unknown. There was a chance that the hydra was as strong as him. Maybe Martin would have moved directly. However, those 3 creatures were now in the vicinity of the forest. The angels were stopping the 3 creatures from entering the forest. Although there were no direct attacks yet, it seemed like a conflict was going to happen. Randolph Brigzeal. His dungeon is likely to be in South Korea. No, a demon wouldn't leave angels alone. Maybe he will soon lead the creatures to attack them. Martin grabbed his staff. It was inevitable that Randolph Brigzeal or other demons would become aware of the presence of the sword. Even though the Saintess hadn't appeared yet, the sacred sword had the power to attract one. If he possessed it, then finding the Saintess would be easy. Another demon would be fine, but it would become complicated if the opponent was Randolph Brigzeal. He is strong. There is also something unusual about him. He wouldn't kill the Saintess. He might plan something similar to me. Martin started feeling a sense of urgency. If the sword entered that guy's hands, then his plan would be wasted. His completed ability to read the future would go away. I have to find the sword before those creatures attack the forest. Martin nodded. The angels would have to move to stop the griffin, Gigantes and the hydra. He would be able to reach the sword without any problems. Great worm, make a path through. A path leading to the very heart of the forest. He had to find the sword first. And the Saintess will appear in critical moments. Have the Doolahans and vampires attack the humans. Make the humans feel despair. He had no thoughts about just stopping after obtaining the sacred sword. Vampires, the lords of the night. They were highly ranked among the 4LV advanced creatures. Although they were a species with strong pride, the Dungeon Master's commands were absolute. They attacked humans and created zombies by injecting blood into them. Injecting a real serum would make demi-vampires, but the human needed to have the aptitude, so it wasn't easy. After 28 days, the zombie effect vanished, but it was effective in making humans panic. People they had known for a long time were attacking them as zombies, so it was terrifying. And they needed to handle the vampires. Vampires also liked malicious pranks. They ordered the zombies to attack the people closest to them. Sung am I, it's me. Don't you recognize Opa? Sung am I, please. Kuik, a rundown shack. A scream could be heard coming from it. Siblings, family members, friends, the zombies spread rapidly, causing the awakened to suffer many difficulties. An emergency meeting was quickly called, but no proper solution emerged. People needed to stay away from dark places as much as possible. Every awakened also limited their patrol. Above all, the citizens were exhausted. Their stress was on the verge of exploding. The people might rebel. A dilemma. They couldn't allow the damage to increase further. The guilds united in order to deal with the situation. We are dealing with vampires. It isn't just one or two. The guild masters and main personnel of the guild were assembled. Yu Un-hai came out and started the briefing. She was the most prominent awakened, so Yu Un-hai played the biggest role in the operation. Her sporty and youthful appearance made her very popular among men, but she used the lightning magic sword. Her usual way of talking meant she was known as the Iron Wall Girl. It was the same even now. She wasn't nervous at all as she casually explained. First, let's look at the vampire I captured. Talk. Yu Un-hai clapped her hands, making Kim Yong-woo and Li Ji-hai pull out a wheeled cage. The guild master Kim Yong-woo being used for such a chore showed how urgent the situation was. The concentration of the other guilds focused. Many people were amazed as they saw the creature sagging like a corpse inside the cage. This, a vampire? Yu Un-hai nodded. That's right, this is a captured vampire. I was only able to catch it after a hard battle. Really, there was a lot of damage. It is due to this vampire that I've called you here. Yu Un-hai gritted her teeth. Vampires were persistent. Hundreds of awakened had died. They had to be very careful releasing knowledge about this vampire to the public. Only the main members of each guild were allowed to attend. How great. But the people were greatly amazed by the results. This wasn't the first time that vampires had appeared. They had been found in many countries and their strength was authenticated. It was surprising that one managed to be captured. We questioned the vampire to find out why they are attacking South Korea and turning people into zombies. After making its body weak, I succeeded with the help of various medicines and hypnotics. It was somewhat provocative. Still, it was better to explain it now compared to later. If she openly talked about it then, there was no need to worry about being caught from behind. Look at this. The vampire has a lot of these bottles containing white substances. Yu Un-hai pulled out a small bottle. There was a diluted, white drug inside it. What is it? Yu Un-hai answered the leader of the Platinum Guild's question. It is a drug to identify something. If ingested by normal humans, it is just a deadly poison. Identify? Prior to this, how many awakened have disappeared since the raid of the creatures began? The struggle against the creatures was harsh. Everybody thought so. It is reasonable not to find the bodies. But that wasn't it. Yu Un-hai took a deep breath before saying, "They're looking for a Saintess. This drug is the tool to determine the Saintess. Unfortunately, we found out that a demon is certainly behind this." Demon? Crazy. Aren't they gone? The people murmured. It was natural. They had experienced firsthand the terrible strength of the demons. They thought it was finished after the Savior took care of them, but now a demon had appeared again. They hugged their bodies tightly and trembled. All the awakened gathered here were the elite. The important thing is the Saintess. The demon is afraid of the emergence of a Saintess. So the creatures are moving to find her. Then we must find the Saintess. Yes, it would be possible if we could use this drug. But doesn't the drug cause death? That is for common people. I was told that it has no effect on the Saintis. There was a clear gap in Yu Un-hai's words. All the people here realized it. How will we know who the Saintis is? No, then we wouldn't even need the drug. Don't you think it is strange that the Savior's children and the Giran aren't present at such an important meeting? Some guilds are also missing. Quote ellipsis ellipsis question mark. They are very busy people. It is also hard for all the guilds to attend. None of them thought it was strange. Roy, Rose and the Giran rarely attended meetings. Heaven's will has been wondering about the movements of the guilds who aren't here. In particular Roy, Rose and Giran Nim have been using reliable people to search for someone. That sounds dangerous. Are you doubting them? At least in South Korea, they were divine beings. The Giran was worshipped as a god while Rose and Roy received special hospitality as the Savior's children. In South Korea, doubting them was blasphemy. But Yu Un-hai didn't hesitate to nod. I am convinced that the person they are looking for is the Saintis. And they have more information than we do. They are moving with confidence. So, what did you want to talk about? Cooperation is required. It is hard for Heaven's will alone to pressure them. I want them to either disclose this information to us or we will tell the public. Madness. A one-word summary. It was madness. It wasn't a peaceful situation, so they couldn't afford to take such behavior. There was no need to divide their power. They should close their eyes to something if it was only a little questionable. Even if Yu Un-hai's words were true, it should be covered up. I have no intention of agreeing with that crazy idea. I won't listen anymore. The leader of the Platinum Guild rose from his seat along with his guild members. At the same time, the door opened to reveal a number of awakened. All the awakened were members of Heaven's will or had a close relationship with them. Yu Un-hai spoke with an expressionless face. Only those who agree can leave. Those who don't, will have to wait here until this is resolved. Are you trying to force us? The Heaven's Will Guild has really gone crazy. Your ego has gotten away from you after being held up as the best guild. There will be a war. We are not afraid of a war. What is really scary? Yu Un-hai continued after a moment of silence. The possibility of giving up our rights and going down the wrong path. I was walking a tightrope with Martin. I couldn't decide if I should appear to attack the forest or not. In the meantime, Martin had invaded the forest twice. All the attempts failed. His plan to use the great worm to dig a tunnel was good. He came near the sword and threatened the angels. However, the angels forced him back into the tunnel and minimized the damage. In contrast, Martin lost most of his creatures. The second attempt was by air. He sent a group of wyverns carrying creatures. The angels didn't fly, they hid in the dense forest and used long-distance attacks. The angels seemed to have expected enemies in the air due to their wings. How interesting. These were all issues that I pointed out. I was currently in the forest. I hid in the vicinity of the sacred sword and watched. The angels truly didn't know where I was. However, he was different. He figured out my location and approached me. The baby angel born a few weeks ago came up to my shoulders. There was a backlash from yin magic and holy magic battling, but he didn't suffer great damage. Both of the powers inside him were strong and pure. This unusual fellow. Usually angels instinctively hated demons. I wasn't significantly different. He just had a wider range of defense against other demons. I briefly used Mind's Eye. Name. Occupation Upper Rank Angel, Cherub, Title. Cherub's Authority, Legend, all stats +7. Stats, Strength 12, +7, Intelligence 35, +7. Agility 20, +7, Stamina 12, +7. Magic Power 44, +7. Potential. 123 + 35 548. Uniqueness. An angel born under the care of a fallen angel. It is impossible to predict how he will grow due to the combination of the Celestial King's blessing, Origin blessing and other variables. Skill. Small light arrow, U. Demons had the potential to overcome their limit when they were born. What about an upper rank angel? I couldn't understand the strength in heaven. However, looking at this, it felt like demons were weaker than angels. After seeing the essence of demons when using corruption, it seemed as if demons were weakened as a whole. Okulos was aware of it. That's why Okulos cried out for evolution. If he knew he was far ahead of other demons, he might have re-evaluated. He was already dead, but I understood him a bit more. Kaya tilde, Hash was still young, but he wouldn't always stay young. He was growing fast due to being affected by the surroundings. He wasn't afraid, but it was better than him being hostile towards me. Somehow my status as dungeon master seemed to affect the cherub. I was just about to poke Hash's forehead when I heard something. My dungeon master. It was Chrisley's voice. What's going on? As I pulled out a crystal ball to talk, Chrisley replied in a somewhat excited voice. I've found the Saintess. Chapter 183 to 185, Half Awakening. Finally, there was a cynical smile on my face. I could finally obtain the decisive card to catch Martin. Have you acquired her? Not yet. There is a little bit of trouble. Trouble? The humans are requesting that we disclose information about the Saintess. It seems like they noticed our movements. I tilted my head to the side. I didn't know how the humans obtained information about the Saintess. I hadn't received a report about this. What happened? They captured one of Duke Martin's vampires. Vampires have strong egos. They only follow the dungeon master, so how was the information obtained? Drugs and various skills. The human awakened have many skills that I don't know. Certainly, there were many humans. They all had different skills. It was completely different from the creatures, who gave off a similar feeling. They wouldn't just suddenly move. There has to be a leader. Yes, my dungeon master, Yuun Hai and Heaven's Will are the ones taking the lead. Talk. I frowned. I hadn't expected that they would be the cause behind an affair like this. If they were involved, then it made sense that Chrisley wouldn't be able to move easily. Why? I worried about it for a while. The issue about the Saintess was still top secret. I didn't know detailed information about the Saintess and was using her as bait to catch Martin. If the humans obtained the Saintess, then I was concerned my plans would have to be changed. Martin might have also noticed. Martin was annoying. In Martin's case, he had eyes and ears among the humans. It was quiet now, but if he heard the truth about the Saintess, he would certainly aim at Roy, Rose and Chrisley. Has the Saintess awakened? She isn't an awakened. However, I have confirmed a pure holy power. I wasn't sure, but Tashmal recognized it. Tashmal had the best eyes to determine holy power. If Tashmal acknowledged her, then it was highly likely she was a Saintess. I need a surefire way to turn their eyes away. Particularly the human awakened. As they gained strength, their actions would escape my calculations. It was good that they had autonomous judgment, but only when they were within my fence. If they tried to go outside the fence, then I had no reason to care for them. Chrisley, tell Roy and Rose. A large number of creatures will move. First, there will be a prophecy. Prophecy? What? It will be a fake but real prophecy. It has to be suitable to make the humans move. In addition, it would be a way to make Martin flinch. Humans. They are overlooking the fact that there is also a dungeon in South Korea. Was it because the dungeon was quiet now? It seemed like they needed to experience it once again. And this move would also deceive Martin. The restructuring of the dungeon was necessary. The structure change meant the ecosystems of the creatures were out of balance. It was time for a house cleaning. In the meantime, Roy became the prophet at the center of the humans. Once the biggest moon reaches the highest point, the entrance of hell will open and messengers will emerge. The messengers will devour all wicked beings. But they can't harm the trees of life and death. Humans, gather near both trees. We have to wait there for the evil to pass. The Savior's child was a prophet? It was the first time. But apart from the Giran and the Savior, Roy had the largest influence among the humans. Roy's words quickly spread throughout Seoul and people started to gather near the trees of life and death. And the full moon rose in the evening. A huge 50,000 creatures exited the dungeon. The creatures that represented South Korea's dungeon? The saber tigers. They had the most numbers and were extremely aggressive. A great number of creatures died from their long fangs. White fiercely fought against the creatures of the other demon. Black followed behind him. However, there wasn't only one black saber tiger. A total of 7 black saber tigers had been born since then. Apart from White, the 7 blacks were advanced 4 LV creatures. There were at least 20 advanced 3 LV saber tigers. The number of normal saber tigers reached 3,000. The next largest population was the minotaurs. 2,200 of them. Their unusual bodies were perfect for making the enemies panic. Of course, they were many lowest grade and low grade creatures. The breeding rate of the orcs and goblins was beyond imagination. The dark bears, mammoths and other beast-like creatures that matched the wavelength of the dungeon were also present. At any rate, I took out most of the lowest and low-grade creatures with this move. The remaining amount were intermediate or higher-ranked creatures. It was an overwhelming number to come from one dungeon. The creatures immediately advanced towards the forest. They surrounded the forest and Seoul metropolitan area to create a dramatic situation. Kim Yura was crying. She lost her family and herself due to the creatures. There were terrible burns on her face and the area below her waist was paralyzed. Her eyesight was very bad and she could barely see in front of her. That wasn't all. She also lost all her hair. She didn't die but was living a horrible life. Nevertheless, she was still living due to her sister who was still alive. She attempted suicide several times but was saved by her sister. Her 2-year younger sister did everything she could so that Kim Yura would somehow live. Ever since the world became like this, she couldn't do that much but her sister worked at a construction site in the morning and sneaked away in the evening for a night shift. Her sister thought she wasn't aware of this, but Kim Yura knew. If her sister didn't do this, Kim Yura wouldn't have been able to receive 3 meals a day. Despite being on the outskirts, they lived in a moderately good shack. She guessed it was possible because her sister helped the awakened and guilds with the construction. Why? Kim Yura spoke with difficulty. Her gums had melted so she couldn't properly speak. She thought this place was hell but she was worried about her little sister. Her younger sister, Kim Min-ji, had returned. Her face was swollen and bruised. Her hair was dirty and there were bloodstains around her mouth. It's nothing. No, we have to get out of here quickly. Huh? The Savior's child has made a prediction. Creatures will soon be swarming this area. We need to take refuge beside the 2 trees. Other people have already left. Kim Yura was carried into the wheelchair and Kim Min-ji started to push her. Like Kim Min-ji said, many people were leaving the shacks. On the other hand, they were bringing nothing but their own bodies. Somehow they were successful in joining the group of people, but that was all. The procession was long and the speed was slow. Besides, Kim Min-ji was injured. Even if she received treatment, she was attracting attention by pushing a wheelchair around. Kim Yura wanted to tell her sister to abandon her, but knew it would make things more difficult. Kim Yura tried everything she could to stay quiet. Half a day passed and evening arrived. The procession stopped for a while and Kim Min-ji slept leaning against the wheelchair. Bastards, collect money, sister, I'll fix it. Kim Yura wept as she heard the words Kim Min-ji was muttering while sleeping. Kim Yura moved her hand to her sister's cheek and prayed for her. She wanted her sister to live comfortably in this hellish world. However, it didn't take long to realize that it was a dream. The problem occurred on the next day. She had a sore throat. She was hungry and her head was dizzy. However, she couldn't obtain any food or drinks herself. Kim Yura refrained from saying anything. Korurik. However, she couldn't hide the response from her stomach. Uni, are you hungry? Just wait, I'll see if I can get you something. Kim Min-ji licked her dry lips and walked among the people. She only received cold glares in return. There was no one in this procession who would give away their food. All the good people had already died. This was a saying that she had heard. She understood. Their lives were important and they had families. In the end, she only managed to eat a little bit of herb porridge. Sorry, Uni. Tomorrow I will be sure to get something to eat. Kim Yura shook her head. She offered the bowl but Kim Min-ji shook her head. I ate a little bit before coming back. If Uni doesn't eat then I'll just throw it away. Her younger sister Kim Min-ji really was a child. Kim Yura ate a bit of bread and some herb porridge. Not long after closing her eyes, she heard a rustling sound. When she opened her eyes, her sister was applying makeup on her injuries. Ah, Kim Yura closed her eyes again. This world was really hell. The next morning, they were able to safely get something to eat. They had 1 sweet potato and a bottle of water. We just need to go a little further. Uni, have you seen Giran Nim? I've never seen someone more beautiful in this world. Uni would also think the same if you saw her. The children of the Savior are cute. I've seen them once from afar. Kim Min-ji continued talking while pushing the wheelchair. She became relieved the closer they got to the center of the building. I've never seen the savior. I've only heard stories about him. He is incredibly cool, the strongest in the world. Hi, isn't he like a Prince Charming? The savior. Her sister was especially interested in the man called the savior. He was like the Prince Charming who would save them from this hellish place. In contrast, Kim Yura was skeptical. Such people wouldn't be left in the world. All the good people had died. Her sister was the only good person left. Vampire. Och, it was at that time. The people at the front started screaming. Uni. It was dangerous as people bumped into the wheelchair. She could barely hang on. Kwang. Kururung. At that time, a partially collapsed building fell and caused an explosion. The building's debris that fell all over the place. Avoid it. Kim Min-ji pushed the wheelchair. Kim Yura fell out of the wheelchair but was able to survive. Her life was saved, but her sister was lying underneath a steel beam. Kim Min-ji's waist was crushed and her eyes weren't looking at anything. Kim Yura placed both hands on the ground. There was no way for her to move her legs. But Kim Min-ji wasn't breathing when she arrived. Kim Yura grabbed Kim Min-ji and tried to shake her. However, the person had already stopped breathing. Like a kaleidoscope, memories of her sister passed through Kim Yura's head. Devoted to Kim Yura, the light inside her couldn't be seen anymore. Hate. She hated everything. Why did all the good people have to die? Why did God make this world so that only bad people could live? At the same time, light started to shine around Kim Yura. The light swallowed up everything around it. She is awakening. A vast amount of holy power. My skin was prickling. I had been observing Kim Yura over the last few days to make sure she was the saintess. And she finally awakened. The surrounding creatures couldn't withstand the light and were destroyed. In fact, the vampires were swept away by the light. Even my transcendent skin was stinging. But it is only a half awakening. I slowly went up to her. The saintess was still in a terrible state. Did she awaken due to her hatred of the world? However, her body was bubbling due to the excess of holy power. She would self-destruct in the near future. So I called it half awakening. In order to stop this rampage, I needed to erase her extreme emotions. Therefore, I approached her quietly. Do you want to save her? I was looking at Kim Yura's sister as I spoke. Kim Yura didn't answer. No, she couldn't answer. However, I could see the expressions in her eyes. She was wondering about my identity since I had appeared out of nowhere. If you reply too late, then I can't save her. There is at most 20 seconds left. I prompted her for a reply. Actually, Kim Min-ji had just stopped breathing. There was still enough oxygen to save her. Of course, she wouldn't be the same as before, but it was possible to save her life. Kim Yura regained her spirit and nodded. If I save your sister, what will you give me? Naturally, it wasn't for free. I wasn't generous enough to just give something away. I was a demon and would act strictly on a contract. It wasn't normal circumstances, so the contract wouldn't be that favorable. There was no choice as time was short. There was only one thing that Kim Yura could give me. I will completely own her. Kim Yura seemed to be trying to speak. Her eyes only contained the desire to save her little sister. In my previous life, Kim Yura wasn't a half awakened. It was inevitable. Martin's invasion was created by me. Originally this hadn't happened. In my previous life, Kim Yura awakened completely and became a saintess who massacred demons and creatures. Although her name wasn't that well known, it still held some weight because she was a saintess. I didn't know what effect the half-awakening would cause, but she was still a saintess. I just needed to somehow save her sister. I took out a bottle from my magic bag. Originally, this was used for the manufacturing of homunculi. I shrugged. It was a potion made by Gaparam. It was the result of purchasing various expensive materials, ingredients from the tree of origin, and 6 months' worth of work. It was much better than the elixir. The potion could literally breathe life into someone who had stopped breathing. It wouldn't work on strong existences but was enough for a human. A total of 2 were made and I had one of them. I had mixed my blood into this bottle. The potion mixed with my blood and turned black. I opened the bottle and fed half of it to her. The potion flowed down Kim Min-ji's neck and her body started to regenerate. In the case of her severed lower body, I could attach it again but decided not to. It was because the process would use up all of the potion. The other half was for Kim Yura. Blood returned to Kim Min-ji's face as life was gradually restored. Kim Min-ji opened her eyes with a puzzled expression. Uni, ah. Kim Yura stretched out and hugged her. Her tears dried, but she still needed to show her thanks. Drink. I handed over the bottle that contained the other half of the potion. Kim Yura hesitated for a moment, so I said, "It will improve your condition." Bubbles were still forming on Kim Yura's skin. Her skin was already badly burned and the bubbles made it obvious that she would soon self-destruct. The problem was the side effect from mixing in my blood. A contract of dependency. It is essential that she drinks my blood. I considered using her sister as a hostage, but that meant she wouldn't move with 100% effort. A contract was necessary for her to help me voluntarily. I could feel more assured. However, there was the possibility that there would be a backlash by the holy power against the blood of a demon. No, there was a high probability. Still, I noted the half-awakening. Her imperfect holy power was devouring her body. My blood might play a role in neutralizing it. It was a 5-to-5 gamble. The Saintess was already in my hands. As long as Martin didn't obtain her, it wouldn't be a huge loss if she died. Either way, the light from the forest was a sign, and Martin would be heading here. He didn't have significant strength, so taking care of him wouldn't be a problem. Gulp. Kim Yura took the bottle and drank it without hesitation. She saw her sister surviving, so she thought the potion was harmless. However, you Uni? No. There was an effect as soon as she swallowed it. Her body twisted as the holy magic and my magic started to get tangled up. It is a fight. I watched the scene with my arms folded. As expected, there were empty spots due to the half-awakening. My magic power penetrated those empty areas and the fight started. Kim Yura screamed and shuddered. Separate from the fight between magic powers, her body was slowly healing itself. The burns disappeared. The nerves below her waist were revived and her twisted posture was fixed. I touched my jaw. I wanted to observe this process, but an uninvited guest was coming. Martin, you are coming directly. I started laughing. A few kilometers away, I felt a strong presence approaching. It was clearly Martin. He is apprehensive. The creatures from the dungeons came out and blocked his advance into the forest. In the end, Martin found it impossible to retrieve the sword that was a sign the Saintess had appeared. I thought to myself, if I missed this chance, then it might not come again. I would move directly. I absolutely can't miss him. So far Martin had been hiding and I couldn't find him. Now that Martin had surfaced, there was no reason I couldn't catch him. I thought a little bit more before moving. I couldn't be hasty based on circumstantial evidence. Impatience could be a sin. I hid my traces and disappeared. A pillar of light covered the sky. Martin realized the Saintess had emerged as soon as he saw it. It was similar to what he had foreseen. He had lost a lot of vampires, but there wouldn't be any damages if he could obtain the Saintess. I'll have to go there directly. Have all the creatures follow me. He had a total of 30,000 creatures following him now in South Korea. He originally had more, but 20,000 creatures had already been killed. Gargoyles darkened the sky. There were also wyverns and king wyverns. All types of creatures in the ground started wriggling. Their destination was the place where the light occurred. I can't miss her this time. I have to quickly obtain the Saintess. He had no intention of confronting South Korea's dungeon master. It was a pity, but the number and quality of Martin's troops were far inferior. How were such troops gathered? A large army had emerged. Maybe Pandemonium was right about Randolph Briggseel. He was irregular. A person who couldn't be easily messed with. He didn't know what would happen, but he didn't worry about Randolph Briggseel. At any rate, Martin's goal here was to obtain the Saintess. As long as he could return to his dungeon safely, he had the confidence to stop strong enemies. He just needed to pass this place safely. Sea creatures, help me. Creatures were moving in the sky and on land. It was like a natural disaster that the humans couldn't resist. The large number of humans moving towards the center were wiped out by the creatures. There wasn't even a piece of bone left in the areas where the creatures passed. It happened so suddenly that the humans couldn't cope. All that remained were a small handful of awakened. My wait is over. I will take away the power of the Saintess and become complete. Perfect predictions. If that was possible, then he wouldn't have to fear anything. Martin believed that there was no perfect and flawless existence. Information was power, and his foresight could figure out the weaknesses of the opponent. Even strong existences had weaknesses, so they would fall to Martin sooner or later. That was why he took these risks. Even now, weak alarm bells were ringing. The word, danger, passed through his mind. However, he had come to this place for a reason. It happened when he had almost arrived at the destination. Martin frowned as he looked at something floating in the sky. It was familiar. He had seen him a few times at the Demon World auction. The magic power was overwhelming. It was strange that he hadn't noticed until he reached here. Randolph Briggseel, Martin exclaimed with shock. Indeed, it really was his dungeon. But there didn't seem to be any other creatures around. That meant he was alone. He had hindered himself. Kill him, cut off the flesh, pull out all his hair and split him open. The 30,000 creatures rushed simultaneously towards Randolph Briggseel. Indeed, I couldn't kill 30,000 creatures alone. Despite entering the realm of transcendence, I was still an individual. Of course, I noticed that there were no high-class creatures among them. Nevertheless, the reason for my actions was simple. Martin is here. No other reason was needed. Martin was in my sights. There was no need for me to handle all 30,000 creatures. I just needed to kill him. Half of them are creatures born in South Korea. If Martin is killed, his control will be lost and they will fight among themselves. I wouldn't need to touch the other creatures if I dealt with Martin. They would struggle among themselves and I wouldn't need to get my hands dirty. It will be a grand sight. I didn't lose my smile at the creatures approaching me. It was the first time I had confronted such a large army alone. It was a scene I dreamed of many times, but I knew my limitations. Now that scene was unfolding in front of me. I was stronger. There was no comparison with my previous life. There was a noticeable difference in the way I looked at the world after becoming stronger. I learned how to deal with this. I stretched out both hands. Waruruk, pride's flames sprang up from my body. At the same time, another power emerged. It was the power of domination. A skill that has a low probability of controlling an opponent in a critical condition. Now I should use it against the army. What was more suitable when dealing with an army alone? Grr! Lightning God excitedly popped out. Fire and lighting were around me and ready to be fired at any time. Then, I turned my head. I pulled out Wrath and the Emperor's sword. Let's start, Martin. I would win or he would win. My heightened feelings caused Wrath to tremble. It would be good information for Pandemonium if he saw my force, but conversely, it could also be a deterrent. If Pandemonium lost Martin, he would have to hesitate before acting. The cumulative damage meant he would have to concentrate on recovery. I would use that time to further the distance between us. No, it was quite possible to devour Pandemonium. Without Martin, it was impossible for him to predict his end. If I move alone, the probability of him getting a vision about it is low. I knew roughly what Martin could foresee. If thousands of my creatures moved here, then Martin wouldn't have showed up. Since I was alone, Martin came here despite some risk. However, this was also a significant gamble for me. If I missed Martin today, then Pandemonium's attacks would become more persistent and he would use a number of creatures that were difficult to deal with. So, I had to catch Martin. If I moved a big army, then Martin's foresight would likely catch it. Get lost. Kawuong. I opened up all my magic power and diverted it into the surroundings. My influence spread out over a few kilometers. At the same time, Martin and the creatures shivered and stopped moving. Those who couldn't withstand my magic power fell. Martin and I were both dungeon masters, however even he had trouble enduring my power. The lowest and low-grade creatures were terrified. Some of the creatures were trampled on and died. I moved my feet. Every time I moved my legs, the ground moved from the burst of magic power like it was welcoming me. This phenomenon occurred when there was an excessive amount of magic power. I had a high density of magic power, so Pride's flames grew bigger and bigger. The wings of flames grew bigger and swallowed up dozens of creatures with every flap. It was in the final form after all my magic power was opened. Of course, Lightning God was also affected. Kwang, Lightning God was literally lightning. Lightning stirred in every place where Lightning God passed. Hundreds of lightning strikes burned the enemy and the lightning rose into the sky, forming a lightning storm. Lightning in the sky and Pride's wings on the ground. I alone moved both powers. Kwang. The first one that I approached was a twin-head ogre. I pressed down with my transcendent power and blocked the fists with Pride's wings. The strong flames covered the twin-head ogre. Kiak. Pride's flames would never go out unless I commanded it. Pride's flames encroached on the twin-head ogre's upper body and spread out a little bit. I stabbed its heart with wrath. Power of domination has been used. The twin-head ogre that lost one of its 2 hearts will now follow Randolph Brigzeal. The power will slowly erode the opponent's spirit. At first it might be somewhat rebellious. However, it will never harm its master and will become completely obedient over time. I was lucky. It was the first time that power had manifested. I erased Pride's flames from its body. The twin-head ogre had complex emotions in its eyes. It was still hostile towards me, but its body was different. Attack those aiming for me. Once the command was given, the twin-head ogre started to move immediately. Its face was confused, but its big fists were already heading towards nearby creatures. Kuuong! Kuuong! The orcs were hit with a series of punches. The same side was attacking them, so the creatures couldn't cope. How fun! It turned out like this. It seemed like a lot of interesting things could happen depending on its use. In order to do this, I needed to attract more creatures. It was like enjoying the taste of a free beer. Wrath and the Emperor's sword moved at once. High-End Moon's swordsmanship stretched out smoothly. My movements were similar to High-End Moon, but they were a little bit more violent. I moved like the moon was splitting. I had improved High-End Moon's swordsmanship to reflect my own will. Quarung. The creatures running from every direction were shattered. But they were still annoying. I stamped my foot down. My feet were placed strongly on the ground and the land showed the aftermath of that power. The earth rose like a wall and divided the creatures. I repeated this act twice and increased the length of the barrier. The creatures started attacking in a more orderly manner. I smiled cynically. However, it was much more cheerful than usual. A carefree feeling. That's right. I now felt a sense of liberation. This was the first time I opened up all the power in my body since facing Okulos. In particular, there had been no chance since becoming transcendent. I had imagined it to an extent. I wondered what it would be like to have enough power to be free. I imagined it on a daily basis. And now it was becoming a reality. Nothing is impossible for me. I felt confident that I could accomplish everything. I had that type of power. In reality, I was much stronger than what I imagined. This was the power of transcendence. I was thrilled with myself. I couldn't imagine what Martin was feeling as he watched me. He would be gloomy. His chest would be tight and his face white. I've experienced that a few times in my previous life. It was mainly when dealing with the Grand Dukes. I will win. Before starting, I was dubious. However, now I was certain. This fight would end with my victory. I expressed my power with every movement of my sword. The more I attacked, the more creatures went on my side. The chaos overlapped and I ended up close to Martin. You, Randolph Brigzeal? Martin cried out with dismay. It was unbelievable. He couldn't believe it. This much magic power. This presence. The overwhelming power that he had only felt from a Grand Duke. They had become weak after coming to Earth. They were quickly regaining their strength. But nobody had crossed the wall yet. Yet the one in front of him had climbed over it. He had climbed the wall to a great height. Why hadn't Martin predicted this? My foresight is on the border of reality. A transcendent person is an unrealistic existence. My foresight can't see. It would have been possible if Randolph had moved with a multitude of creatures. But Martin's foresight couldn't predict it when he was moving alone. Randolph Brigzeal. Martin honestly hadn't understood why Okulos and Ariel Diablo were nervous about him. Even Pandemonium was focused on him. All he had was more points than anyone else. Martin thought his power wasn't that great. No, he saw wrongly. He had felt pride in his eyes that could see most things. Now Randolph had an army on his side. Whenever he swung his sword, the creatures would move to his side. Martin commanded the creatures, but it was like they couldn't hear it. It is unbelievable. An authority beyond a dungeon master. He couldn't believe that a demon had this strength. However, it was right in front of him. This was the reality. Martin was annoyed. He was also sick to his stomach. He had made this gamble in order to gain complete foresight, only to have a transcendent demon appear and laugh at him. How on earth? He couldn't guess at all. There was a limit to how strong someone could get. In particular, no matter how inaccurate, his foresight should have seen it. However, Randolph remained out of sight until the end, so he couldn't easily believe it. You, Randolph Brigzeal? He made a desperate declaration. Then his foresight was triggered. It was an unchanging, "I will die here." He gritted his teeth, but he couldn't die. Change the axis of time. Time for you and I will flow differently. Martin's strongest skill, time axis, epic, was triggered. It was a skill that affected the time in a 3-kilometer radius. Some would move faster, others would slow down, and some wouldn't move at all. It wasn't possible to designate a target for the skill, but it was a gamble that could increase his survival rate. But, time axis, epic, has been discovered by mind's eye. Defended against 50%, defended against 13%, the opponent's high intelligence and magic power will nullify time axis altogether. What? It had been completely invalidated. The skill had already started, yet it was possible to break it? But that person just laughed. It was helpful for him. Randolph came close and wielded his sword. Could Martin avoid it? It was too late. Martin wielded his staff. Illusions were summoned to block the front. Illusion technique, epic, has been discovered by mind's eye. Crazy? All methods were blocked. It was really the worst case situation. There was such an overwhelming difference in power. I can't die until my foresight is complete. Martin grinded his teeth together. I stabbed him with wrath and the Emperor's sword. Martin was gone. At the same time, the creatures started a crazy rampage. I plucked out both of Martin's eyes. I'll give them to Gaparam. They were eyes that allowed foresight. The effect had disappeared due to Martin's death, but if they were refined, then some of their abilities could be recovered. The eyes would be a good material for a homunculus. I placed the eyes in my magic bag and turned off Pride's flames. Lightning God returned to me. Now I have to see the Saintess. I had suddenly left in the middle of her changes. I had to confirm the results. I turned around without any fear. I ran towards the place where the Saintess was. Kim Yura was lying down. Her body was recovered while the holy power and my magic power were mixed together stably. I had been uneasy, but they were actually rather balanced. Saintess of Harmony. I laughed as I used mind's eye to check her status window. The occupation column contained Saintess of Harmony. I had expected something like corruption, but the result was completely different. It might be because my magic power was pure. The contract is formed. You are now mine. Anyway, I had obtained a Saintess. It wasn't a bad income. I carried Kim Yura and Kim Min-ji on my shoulders. And I returned to the dungeon. It was the first time I opened all of my magic power, so I felt a little bit tired. I will leave cleaning this up to Yihi. Chapter 186 to 188, Sacred Zone. Yihi was excited. She had forcefully made a garden from on top of Gigante's. She had been afraid of Dungeon Master's anger but actually received praise. He even asked her to clean things up. Yihi tilde. Yihi laughed from her place on Gigante's head. It was proof that he trusted her. Perhaps his order of faith was reversed, with Yihi ahead of Chrisley. The thought of Dungeon Master realizing her worth meant the smile never left her mouth. Little fairy, noisy, but Gigantes didn't like it. What? Why? What is Yihi noisy? Yihi, get off my head, bald creature. Bah, Yihi is someone who received Master's trust. You should be thankful that Yihi is on your head. Crazy fairy, are you blaming Yihi now? Seeing, naughty baldy, Yihi formed a fist and punched Gigante's head. Her physical strength had increased after the upgrade. A lot of power was contained in one fist. Gigantes frowned and shook his head. Baldy, live for a lifetime bald. Bald isn't bad. Bah, Master entrusted Yihi with a task. How important is a bald creature to him? Yihi, insane fairy. Yihi kept on teasing and laughing at Gigantes. Gigantes didn't like it and shook his head. Yihi tilde. Still, Yihi was very happy. The attack of the creatures. And the ensuing fight. All the awakened in soul heard the noises. They saw flaming wings and lightning. In particular, there was a dark magic power that made them sick. What was going on? The awakened immediately sent a team for exploration. They were speechless as they found the bodies of creatures piled up like a mountain. It looks like they died after fighting each other. Looking at the scene, that isn't necessarily the case. The first to die, doesn't it seem like they died from one person? One person against all these creatures? I saw a barrage of flames from a distance. There was also lightning strikes. The one who uses such powers, the savior. The Savior swept away all these creatures. There were many comments as they explored. The most prominent thing was the emergence of the Savior. No one other than the Savior could handle thousands of creatures alone. I have found a demon. But both eyes are missing. Secure it. It was the first time they could acquire a demon's body. Everyone on the exploration team was excited. The body could be used as materials or to experiment with skills. They salivated just imagining the uses for the corpse of a demon. The members wrote down the different type of creatures in the notebook. It would be used to write a risk report. After a few minutes, cough. Some of the crew started coughing up blood. Their faces became pale like an ill patient and their hands and feet trembled. There was only one thing that could cause such symptoms out of nowhere. Poison. What poison? Is it poison due to the decomposing bodies? These bodies haven't been dead for more than 2 days. It can't be that. Someone clearly sprayed poison. It was a very strong poison. The poison dissolved the skin of the creatures. The creatures with weak leather skin were so melted together that their identities couldn't be confirmed. They discovered this too late. The earth where poison was sprayed. They couldn't take it back. But that wasn't the end. Something attacked the exploration team and many of them died. Creatures. They are in the ground. Damn. Poison goblins. Poison goblin. A creature that emitted poison from its body. They had a strong obsession with their territory, so not many dared go to places where poison goblins lived. In the end, the team leader of the scouts bit his lip and said, "Let's go back. This place, it is the land of the dead." Yi massaged her shoulders. Ahiu Tilda, how annoying. This is harder than I thought. She returned to the forest and got some honey from the bees. She held a cup of the most delicious honey. As many bees wandered around aimlessly, she drank honey and water in the perfect ratio. Ah, delicious. Drinking honey water after working is really sweet. Yi touched her jaw as she drank the honey water. Handling this is an unpleasant affair. Processing the bodies? The instructions are clear. Then, Yi had been happy after hearing Master's instructions, but was disappointed when she arrived at the scene. She decided to make a compromise by letting another handle it. Master had trusted her to deal with the things left behind. Yi turned her head and peeked at someone else. Puny angel? You, what is your name? Hash. A short reply. The angel was slightly larger than Yi. There were many wings. Yi nodded. Hash? Ah tilde, you are Hash? Kai tilde. Hash flew near Yi. Yi. Do you want to go with Yi? Yi grinned as Hash easily agreed. Okay. Yi will specify what to do. Then where do you want to go? Well, let's go to see the humans. Humans are really funny. Yi tilde, we can have some fun with Roy and Rose. What do you think? Yi flew forward with Hash behind her. Thus, the humans recorded the incident of the fairy and baby angel flying in the sky as a horrifying nightmare. Kim Yura and Kim Min Ji. They were both laying motionless as I examined them. Kim Yura's appearance was completely restored. There were no signs of disability. She was born anew with a clean and pure image. It was enough to think saintess. On the other hand, Kim Min Ji was completely different. She had barely survived after losing her lower extremities. Humans can't live without their lowest extremities. It wasn't easy to heal the lower part of the body that had already been cut off. It was possible to live, but I wondered if it was worth it. Kim Yura has become the saintess. Her sister, I restored her life, but I don't need to get involved if she dies again. I had kept my promise. I saved the dying Kim Min Ji, but I didn't know if she would die again. But something was strange. Tashmal. I called Tashmal. It felt like the hair on the back of my neck was rising. I didn't know what it meant, so I wanted to ask Tashmal. What's going on? Tashmal was busy raising the angels. She seemed tired but answered my question immediately. Can you feel anything? From the saintess? It certainly feels odd. I don't think she is a common saintess. I'm not talking about the saintess but her sister. Her sister? The human without legs? Tashmal moved her gaze. At the same time, Tashmal started frowning. This is strange. She isn't a saintess but has a holy power similar to that of a saintess. In fact, she is much like her sister. What does that mean? The holy power is connected to both of them. Perhaps it isn't just the holy power but also their lives that are connected. It is efficient and strong. This is the first time I've seen it, so my answer isn't definite, but if my thoughts are correct, both of them will have power considerably higher than a normal saintess. Instead, their strength will decline if both of them are away from each other. It was another unexpected harvest. This was the feeling that tickled me. I hadn't noticed because Kim Min-ji's holy power was small. But the conditions were tricky. There were two bodies but one life, and they had to always be close to each other. Can you train them? I asked Tashmal. It was impossible for me to tell them how to use holy power. The only one who could teach them was Tashmal. Dungeon Master, you will be a better match than me. I don't know why, but there isn't just holy power. Your magic power is also present. I thought it was impossible for the two powers to coexist at the same time, but the younger sister has more of your magic power while the older sister has more holy power. The two bodies perform different roles. It was balanced in that way. Then it wasn't impossible for me to train them. I'll have to make a lower body for her. I discovered that they were one, so there was no need to hold back. Although it was a hassle, I would tell Gaparam and Oswin to make a functioning lower body for her. Rather, Dungeon Master, I heard you caught a duke this time. Martin was killed. Then, what do you plan to do with his dungeon? There is nothing planned. Why are you asking? Tashmal's expression became serious. There was a moment of silence before Tashmal carefully opened her mouth. The dungeon? Can you think about giving it to the angels? So they can declare a sacred zone? That's right. I have been watching the angels in the world and they're being defeated. I don't like it. If they have a focal point, then they can focus on killing the demons. Except for you. She hastily tacked on the final words. If I think there are benefits, then I will obtain the dungeon. I wasn't good enough to simply hand over the dungeon. Of course, declaring a sacred zone would keep the other demons in check, but that wasn't enough of a benefit. Tashmal spoke with complex emotions in her eyes. In a while, Kamiel Nim will descend. One of the 7 angels with the rank of seraphim. He has personally come to cleanse the earth. A place is needed to greet him. My eyebrows furrowed. Seraphim. It was referring to the strongest angel in the hierarchy. How many times had I seen a seraphim descending in my previous life? It was also strange that Tashmal knew about it. She was a fallen angel and wouldn't be able to return to heaven. How did she know this if communication with heaven had been lost? Are you sure? I received a revelation. Aren't you a fallen angel? I sneered. The laws of heaven were very strict. A fallen angel wasn't considered an angel. It wasn't strange to be treated the same as a demon after falling. A revelation. It was the act of hearing God's voice directly. In my previous life, many angels died due to their intervention. Tashmal found it difficult to understand my feelings. The revelation is real. On the day that the sun swallows the moon, Kamiel Nim will descend. I looked at Tashmal carefully. She couldn't lie to me as I was the dungeon master, so she must really think it was real. Kamiel. It is Kamiel. I heard there were 7 angels in heaven with the rank of seraphim. In my previous life, I had seen Zadkiel in the last war. The angel burned 3 dukes and several demons, so I was left with a strong impression. Now an angel with similar powers was coming down? The balance will collapse. The demons were still inferior. Now it was time to start running. If Kamiel descended, then even the Grand Dukes wouldn't be safe. What does it mean by the sun swallowing the moon? I don't know. Revelations are always abstract. However, what I saw was terrible. The destruction of the world. Tashmal swallowed her words. She was slightly nervous. I don't know the exact timing. That was the most important part. I couldn't help but worry. If the revelation was real, then Kamiel would descend. It wasn't bad to decide the place where he would arrive. It would be worse if he was randomly summoned. So it was a wise choice to leave him within my reach. The problem was that once a sacred area was proclaimed, all the angels would gather. I needed to decide if I could afford it or not. A wise choice that I could cope with was necessary. Kamiel is strong? Zadkiel was strong. Stronger than I was now. He was huge enough to cover the sky. It wasn't the common form of an angel. He was round like a planet and constantly shooting out rays, with each one having the power to destroy an island. So I had to ask. He is immortal. If his 1,140,000 subordinate angels aren't killed, then he won't die. 1.14 million? The army was truly different. I didn't even have 1 million creatures. At best, it was tens of thousands. Yet he had 1.14 million subordinate angels. It was far beyond what I had. Are you saying he will come down with 1.14 million angels? Tashmal nodded. That's right. Once the sun swallows the moon. Wait, isn't his purpose the demons? Kamael would descend when the sun swallowed the moon. Listening to Tashmal's words, it seemed like the reason Kamael was descending was due to the sun. Unfortunately, that is all I know. I can't give you any more answers even if I wanted to. Tisk. I clicked my tongue. There was information missing. Anyway, Kamael was coming down with 1.14 million angels. The story was different if those 1.14 million angels needed to be killed first. It will be difficult. I have to designate a sacred zone. 1.14 million. The last time the angels descended, it was hard to find them because they were randomly summoned. Of course, I wasn't thinking about giving up. I would take a few steps so I would be prepared the moment he descended. In addition, I will catch Kamael. It will be a very good accomplishment before becoming a devil. Even if he was descending, it wasn't occurring right now. I would become stronger in the meantime in order to catch Kamael. Among the current Grand Dukes, I would gain orthodox achievements that no one else had. So that no one in the demon world would argue if I became the devil. Killing one of the 7 main angels was enough qualification to become the devil. And, I was curious. I wondered if I could fight with a seraphim if I took more steps further into the realm of transcendence. If it was similar to my previous life, then it would be a fierce battle. Okay, they can proclaim a sacred zone. However, placing an angel there, is it possible? The other angels are already dead or half corrupted by the power of the dungeons. The only possible angel is Hash. The other angels wouldn't dare doubt Hash. Hash? He is still too young. He wasn't even 6 months old. Hash was a little angel that could barely say one word. I couldn't expect a lot from his ability to properly perform a task. The other angels won't work. They won't be able to get past the angel's eyes. Once there are suspicions, they will start attacking. It is under the pretext of angels being bred. Indeed, I didn't have a lot of faith but couldn't deny that Hash was the only possibility. I want you to train Hash as much as possible. It will end the moment the sacred zone is declared. Several long months. There was no answer except hard training for as long as possible. I will try. Tashmal had a dubious attitude. No matter how fast the growth was in the dungeon, there were still limits. It was up to Tashmal to teach Hash while he was growing. I turned around. Tashmal withdrew shortly afterwards. She needed to start training Hash immediately. A sacred zone. Kamael. The sun swallowing the moon. There was a lot of work in the immediate future. If the revelation was true, it seemed like all demons would experience a radical change. I knew the information, but what would the demons do when Kamael descended? It was fun just to imagine it. A feeble groan was suddenly heard. It wasn't far from this place. Kim Yura was waking up. Min Ji. Kim Yura shot upwards after waking up. She cried out the name of the sister who sacrificed herself, but an unfamiliar scene entered her sight. This place. It was dark. A candle was lit but it was feeble. A damp and humid place. The first thing she saw were rocks. Wait a minute, my voice. Kim Yura's eyes widened. Oh my God. Her voice came out normally. Her gums had been melted so her pronunciation wasn't normal, but her words just then had been correct. Even her legs could move. She used to be a paraplegic that required a wheelchair. She couldn't use the muscles in her legs but now they were fine. Kim Yura urgently raised her hands to her face. It was smooth. The burns on her skin were gone. How? She frowned. She touched her hair with her hand. At the same time, memories started passing through her head. The assault of the vampires. Her sister's sacrifice. And, a man appeared. The man asked if she wanted her sister to be saved. And then she drank something from a bottle. That was all she remembered. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't recall what occurred next. You woke up. At the moment, the voice of the man who brought her out from hell could be heard. Who are you? Where is my sister? I gave a small laugh. That was the first thing she asked after seeing me. She was suddenly daring. She was acting quite brave. This was a place that she didn't know, so it was natural to feel confused. You will know soon. Do you want to confirm the changes in your appearance? I pulled out a mirror from my magic bag. I raised a thumb and the dungeon lit up. Small lights emerged and instantly brightened the dungeon. Kim Yura's eyes widened with surprise. She accepted the hand mirror and confirmed the image reflected there. This is me? It was incredible. Her body had been horribly burned. Now her skin was clean and clear. The criteria of beauty wasn't that different between humans and demons. It was natural to be surprised by waking up to a completely different face one day. After giving her some time to appreciate it, I spoke. You have awakened as the Saintess. Your power was running wild and I saved you. Therefore, your life is mine. Wait a minute. I'll ask again. Who are you? Where is my sister? I am Randolph Briggseel. Some call me Savior while others call me Dungeon Master. Your sister is recovering in a safe place, so don't worry. Anyway, my contract with Kim Yura was completed. She wouldn't be able to escape from me. I coolly revealed the information. Savior. Are you really the Savior? The contents afterwards didn't seem to have entered her ears. The Savior part was more important than the Dungeon Master because the Savior had a huge influence on the humans in South Korea. And humans usually heard what they only wanted to hear. I didn't try to deny it. I am called that. Kim Yura's entire body trembled. She clenched her fists and said, Savior Nim, let me meet my sister. Please, follow me. I led the way with my hands clasped behind my back. Kim Min-ji was currently being examined by Gaparam. There was a lot of work to do in order to customize new lower parts for her. Gaparam's workshop was located quite far away from the core. Kim Yura's face became pale as we walked by many creatures. Excuse me, perhaps, is this the dungeon? That's right. An orc lord was leading a group of hundreds of orcs. But rather than attacking, the orc lord just struck the left side of its chest with its right hand. Kung, kung, kung. The other orcs followed suit. It was the method that the orcs used to greet their master. Kim Yura was confused and asked, By the way, why aren't the orcs attacking? It looks like a greeting. It was clear that she hadn't heard my previous words. I disliked repeating things, but I would explain it once more for a smoother conversation. Didn't you hear me say it? Some call me the Dungeon Master. I am the master of this dungeon. Kim Yura remained silent while moving. She sometimes looked at me with complicated eyes, but she didn't open her mouth. I was the savior and also the master of the dungeon. It was an unchanging fact. Due to the atmosphere, Kim Yura didn't dare speak and just moved her feet. Here, a place where the dark elves lived. I stepped on the floor where the tree of origin was. It was a presence larger than any creature we had passed. Kim Yura's eyes widened. Due to her awakening and the holy power of a saintess, the tree of origin was welcoming her. Divine tree, Kim Yura muttered in a small voice. I just laughed. It isn't a big deal. We had different perspectives. Some might call it a divine tree, but from my point of view, the tree of origin was just an unusual tree. I had met the gods of the earth before returning to the past and the tree didn't feel like them. It was just some pressure. I wasn't going to look up to it. Welcome, Dungeon Master. Julium was the first one to notice my presence. The dark elves of the village lined up behind him. There was roughly 1,000 of them. There were many children. It seemed like the population of dark elves had been increasing. At the same time, they were looking at me with total loyalty. I took such devotion for granted, but Kim Yura stared at them with fascination. Dark elves. The dark elves were famous for not following anyone. The only person they followed was naturally the Dungeon Master. Kim Yura bit her lip as if there was no doubt now. Whether she believed it or not, I went straight to the point. Bring me to the female human that I left here. Yes, although she hasn't regained her spirit. Julium replied. I shook my head and said, I will see her. Follow me. Julium led the way. An unusually lush forest area in the center. After walking through some buildings, Julium's house appeared. I had left Kim Min-ji, who needed treatment, with Julium. The dark elves didn't like humans very much. They followed my orders, but that wouldn't change. Kim Min-ji lay on a bed made of grass and leaves. Dark elves were taking turns feeding her some porridge. Min-ji. Kim Yura was overcome with emotions as she ran towards Kim Min-ji. But for some reason, Kim Min-ji acted like she couldn't hear it at all. Is something wrong? I asked about Kim Min-ji's strange attitude and Julium replied that she seems to have lost something important. Lost? Her spirit. I don't know why, but she is just like a doll. I turned my eyes towards Kim Min-ji. Kim Min-ji was expressionless like a marionette. Spirit. The spirit. Originally it was normal. In addition to the physical injuries, she seemed to have received a larger shock. Was there a problem with the awakening? Is she an idiot? To be honest, I didn't know if she had really lost her spirit. But this type of reaction was usually seen from those who were idiots. Julian shook his head. She isn't an idiot. She reacts to some things. But, isn't she connected to that human woman? Then there might be a reaction. Kim Yura was sobbing while holding Kim Min-ji. Even so, there was no reaction. I will be back after a while. I will be near the tree of origin. Go take a look, Dungeon Master. Julian glanced towards two dark elves. I refused to allow them to accompany me and started walking alone. Yi could communicate with the tree of origin as the origin fairy, but I had never managed to talk to it. It was a special challenge that I hadn't tried. But after hearing the story about Camiel and the sun swallowing the moon, I wanted to come here and think for a minute. It isn't me. It wasn't in my nature, but I decided it wouldn't hurt to be emotional for once. I leaned back against the tree of origin and folded my arms. Camiel, the sun swallowing the moon. A strong being that hadn't appeared in my previous life. His emergence was due to me. I am changing everything. Change was never bad. I looked at these changes positively. However, the changes were often abrupt. Despite Camiel and the angels, my goal to become the devil was unchanged. Still, it was crucial to become stronger faster. The current me couldn't beat a seraphim. I went to the underground world and became stronger. More than anyone else. I won't stop here and will surely continue to grow. It isn't enough. Camiel was a very big variable, and I needed to get my hands on this variable. Right now he was out of reach. There is no meaning in becoming stronger alone. Expanding my forces is one way to become stronger. I can consolidate my dungeons and increase my power. I frowned. Zadkiel. I had seen a seraphim in my previous life. He was powerful. He was an enemy that brought great fear to the demons. Hundreds of thousands of creatures were wiped out by him. It wasn't unreasonable for him to fight a Grand Duke one-on-one. It took an enormous sacrifice in order to eliminate him. I want to win. However, I wanted to win. I wanted to kill Camiel alone. Getting rid of Camiel with my creatures wasn't an accomplishment that would be remembered for long, but the story would be completely different if I took care of him alone. In order to do that, I had to be stronger than I was now. I have to look at just my pure stat points. My potential was 555 points. However, I still hadn't filled all of it. At best, I had 440 points. I still needed to raise my stats by more than 100 points. Filling it all up, it was possible. I thought it was possible. The stats calibration would increase it up to 650 points. It wasn't impossible to be called a god, and I could even deal with Camiel. Upgrade my pure stats. I predicted that they would rise to 500 points without much difficulty. If not, my potential limit wouldn't rise. However, that wasn't enough to fulfill my greed. Something unexpected, a strange idea that I wouldn't normally think of. The conventional methods wouldn't work. I needed a method that no one had thought of but was efficient. But ideas that no one could figure out also applied to me. It was like catching a cloud in the sky. I worried about it for a long time. Then my eyes were caught by the giant tree that extended endlessly. Origin resembled purity. Origin didn't have a color. I raised my hand and brought it to the tree of origin. I need an answer. In heaven, the celestial king can communicate directly with the tree of origin when there is a serious matter. If so, tell me the answer to my troubles. It was just a story. There was no credibility and no one could confirm it. However, my eyes were serious. My senses were saying, the tree of origin has an answer. No, it was like I gained a similar ability after killing Martin and taking his eyes. It took a few seconds for a result, but the response was very strong. I had never communicated with the tree of origin, but this time was different. I had previously opened my magic power and talked as the dungeon master, yet the tree of origin hadn't reacted. Swayak. Soon the branches started to move. Kuuong. The ground shook and roots popped out to swallow me. At the same time, I received a vision. After coming back, I opened my eyes and found that I was still in front of the tree of origin. The roots and branches wrapped around me were gone. It felt like a dream. I scowled. I barely remembered what had happened. Definitely, I fought with myself. It was blurred as I forced myself to recall it. I had fought against myself. But that was all. The contents and result of the fight were erased from my head. Do I need to fight with myself because I have no enemies? I clicked my tongue as I looked at the tree of origin. Anyway, the fact that my memory was ambiguous meant the result wasn't good. I'll come again. I turned around. I had received an answer. I didn't know if this method would make me stronger, but it was better than doing nothing. Angels scattered all over the world started moving. They spread their long wings and gathered in one place, ignoring all enemies. It was like they had all received a revelation. The angels gathered in Ukraine, Europe. It was the place where Martin's dungeon was located. For eternal glory, thousands of angels gathered on the top floor of the dungeon, and Alex, a throne's angel, stabbed his sword into the floor and declared a territory. Huang. At the same time, a divine light exited the dungeon and spread through the sky. The dungeon was transformed into one huge cradle. The cradle scattered holy power around. All creatures in the area were melted down, leaving no traces behind. Only the pious humans could stay in this place. The wicked would have to take care of themselves. As they prayed, a multitude of lights was simultaneously seen around the world. Demons, humans and the remaining angels started to focus on the light. Chapter 189 to 190. Fight with oneself. The gathering of the angels and manifestation of the sacred zone had some influence on the demons. Ariel and Upa stopped their war for a while. Maxium's fight with a Gorgon was also disrupted before resuming again. Pandemonium. He rallied his power and tried to determine the movements of the angels. He had discovered Martin's death. It was like gunpowder on the brink of exploding. My dungeon master. The trees of life and death have grown normally. Chrisley returned to the dungeon. She came to see me to report on her mission. I stood motionless near the tree of origin as I watched it. I didn't answer, but Chrisley just nonchalantly continued. The emergence frequency of awakened has more than doubled and their growth rate is quite fast. Roy and Rose's positions are stable. There are several candidates for a king. I took out Wrath and the Emperor's sword. Then I wielded the two swords with my eyes closed. I was listening to Chrisley. I just wasn't greatly interested. It was what I had been expecting. The Giran has named 7 people as candidates. 2 of the humans are Yoon Hai and Edward. The decisive battle will take place on the sacred day with the biggest moon. Will all the humans agree with the outcome of the battle? Yes. I'm afraid I will observe it. If the savior emerged, then it would feel more auspicious. Roy and Rose might be able to move the humans with greater force. My appearance was needed. I moved Wrath as I made a decision. HWIK. Wrath quickly split through the air, but I shook my head. Strange. I had gone to the tree of origin several times to fight against myself. My clone appeared and I used my skills in swordsmanship, yet I always lost. The clone's stats weren't higher, and I lost most of my memories of the fight every time. It was like some type of cognition. My memories were scattered. After a few challenges, I tried to remember the feeling with my swords. In addition, one of my pure stats rose after recalling those memories. Strength increased by 1. This was a surprising result. I would need a few months to raise a pure stat by 1 point using ordinary methods. If 1 increased in less than 10 days, the possibilities are enough. I decided that it was suitable for growing quickly, so I focused more on my fights against the clone. The person certainly had the same stats and skills as me. However, he seemed to use my power more flexibly than I did. I tried to make some preparations based on my memories, but it was difficult to prepare for the unknown. My dungeon master, are you troubled about something? Have you ever fought with yourself? With myself. Chrisley thought about it with a serious expression. Recently, there was a similar fight in the training room. Tell me, the advanced training room. Time flowed differently for Chrisley inside the training room. I heard a voice in my head the moment I entered. It said, only those who are more complete can leave here. And I didn't know that the flow of time was different, so I trained hard to get out as quickly as possible. Her eyes were complicated. It seemed like she didn't like to be reminded of that time. I didn't say anything and Chrisley was forced to go on. One day, a few days, after 100 days, I realized that I could utilize some skills more properly. However, the door didn't open because I was far from completion. I felt some heartbreak and memories of my past emerge. I was trapped by the sickness of the heart for over 100 days. Chrisley was a dark elf who was rarely shaken. I could hardly imagine that she became so sick of heart that it lasted for more than 100 days. However, that sickness opened up another path. I saw the weaknesses in my past. After that, I was able to grow stronger and leave the training room. How did you get over the sickness? That, Chrisley sneaked a glance at me before looking away again. I don't know. It is hard to say exactly what it was. My brows furrowed as I squeezed Wrath and the Emperor's sword. In short, her weak parts were highlighted and she was able to strengthen herself by resolving those weaknesses. I worried about it. My weak parts? Sickness of the heart was caused by weakness. I had been worried and distressed but never sick to the heart. If so, I needed to think about my weaknesses. But, I didn't have much to say about my weaknesses. Arrogance and high self-esteem were essential elements to me. I had succeeded based on this confidence. A clear desire to get everything was required to become the devil. I couldn't allow these things to grab my ankles. No matter how important, it wasn't more important than my dream. My dungeon master, is that the answer? You have given me an idea. Thank you. I nodded and continued thinking. Weaknesses. Me weaknesses. The weak parts of me? My pure abilities were low, but that wasn't a weakness in itself. My skills were also highly rated, so that couldn't be the weakness. I will have to think about it. It was a completely different direction that I would have never thought about. I had just been worrying about a lack of swordsmanship. I closed my eyes and thought deeply. It was the 31st challenge. The tree of origin encircled me and I appeared in a world of illusion, with my clone facing me. It is getting tiresome. Although it was my face, I was getting tired after seeing it for 30 consecutive times. I took out Wrath and the Emperor's sword. My clone also brought out Wrath and the Emperor's sword. I'm not tired. The clone spoke. You can talk? I had no memory of this. However, I didn't remember much of the last 30 times, so he might have spoken. Yet the answer was surprising. This is the first time. I wanted to say that I'm not tired. The first time? You can ask me questions. But you will just forget my answers. Anyway, the result will be the same. Walk. The clone's swords were surrounded by a dark aura. It was the manifestation of Dark Sword. He also ignited Pride's flames and rushed towards me. As expected, this was a pattern that had been repeated many times already. I combined the sparse memories and grasped some of the clone's movements. Kong. I returned the same attack. Anyway, his power and stats were exactly the same as mine. There was a power struggle for a few minutes. You look exactly like me and have the same abilities, yet you are obviously different. A fake. It is obvious if I look closely. Is it because I am better? The clone sneered. I didn't react and remained silent. The mannerisms and personality, everything except the outside appearance is different. Are you really my clone? Aside from his movements, I could infer things from his habits and personality. As a result, I concluded that he was a different person from me. I was cynical but not pessimistic. I didn't always laugh at others. However, the clone's eyes were always filled with ridicule. I am me, nobody else but me. Hua. Many cracks appeared in the space. It was because he focused his magic power on Wrath. Kuong. Today I will take one of your childhood memories. The nightmare. Hoo-hoo. You might not know it yourself, but there is always a trauma. Completeness is the same as discarding the incomplete parts. My head was hit a few times. A strong pain. I searched through my memories, but the fight with the clone was still vague. I can only remember that he spoke. It was an approximate dialogue. But there was a question mark about whether he had spoken before. Another one. The way he used his magic power. I recalled one of the scenes of the battle. In the final scene, he had let out a burst of magic power. Wrath was used as the focus and it resulted in a new cohesion with Dark Sword. Agility has risen by 1. I nodded. Simply remembering it raised my stats like this. It didn't happen every time, but it was still a quick development. Over the 30 attempts, my pure stats had risen by 3 points. If this continued, then I would be able to fill up all the remaining potential in a few years at most. It would be faster if I could try more than once a day, but it was impossible to move the tree of origin. I could only fight the clone once a day. Either way, I should challenge again tomorrow. It wasn't a pleasant experience. The opponent was still me after all. I left with the thought of winning. The 50th attempt. As soon as I arrived, I faced my clone with a smile. Do you remember the battle? Or maybe a memory from your previous life? You look just like a twitching cockroach. That will soon be your appearance. Hoo-hoo. That's funny. That is only if you win. The 60th time. Nobility. A title only given to powerful demons. But unlike you, I am strong without such titles. What do you want to say? It is funny how you are hanging onto something so meaningless. You are talking nonsense. The 70th time. Why do you come back? Do you want to change the results? You are asking something obvious. I will be the devil. So you made a promise with the gods in order to return? Are you seeking strength by killing yourself? Funny. As the number of attempts increased, the fights started to vary. Little by little, I started to understand the existence of I. As the fight goes on, he starts to resemble me more. On the contrary, I am. At first, it was different. As the fights were repeated, it started becoming more equal. No, I was moving further away. That guy was now chasing after me. I am becoming like him. I clicked my tongue. Then I received a little enlightenment. I realized that it didn't just apply to the clone. And finally, it was the 100th try. I went back to the beginning. Who was whose clone? Now I couldn't differentiate myself from him. I was become more complete, while he was becoming incomplete. And I was becoming increasingly apathetic. Or was I becoming dried out? I had cold eyes. I showed off neat movements. It was like a machine. That guy was no longer my opponent. He was becoming increasingly weaker while I was getting stronger. However, there was an emptiness inside me. In this situation, even my blood was cold as I fought. I suddenly had the thought that, this isn't the type of completion that I want. I was getting stronger, but I didn't want to be complete if I wasn't myself. I am going to laugh loudly when I become the devil. That was my wish, my dream. It was my wish to sit there and laugh loudly, not just sit down. That laugh would mock everyone who tried to take it away from me. But if I was apathetic, then I wouldn't be able to feel anything when I became the devil. It can't be. In order to be complete, did I have to discard the incomplete parts? If so, I wouldn't become complete. I had gone through many trials and errors even when incomplete. However, this sudden change was like laughing at my efforts. It was like I was denying my dream. I was very satisfied with my arrogance and high self-esteem. Yet it was dismissed as a weakness. I'll accept it. It wasn't funny. I don't like this. A small change. I would turn it backwards. It was literally a fight with myself. It took a great deal of mental effort to recover my original mindset. Agility has dropped by 1. My stats dropped. After replenishing the missing parts, my stats returned to their original state. But I didn't mind. This type of completion wasn't the direction that I wanted. It might be slow, but I would succeed in my own way. Then the eyes of the clone change. Stupid person, you can't throw it away. Did you come all this way to completion only to kick it away? His words were rough, but his eyes were different. Surprise. He was surprised by me. His eyes were asking how this was possible. I already understood him because I was being assimilated with him. Throwing this away? I laughed. The things I gained from reaching completion. I was abandoning them now. Then the clone grinded his teeth together. Choosing imperfection. Foolish and stupid. Don't make me laugh. Aren't you the one who wants this foolishness? I laughed as I stared at him. He was different every time we fought and changed little by little. And those changes were sometimes familiar. I couldn't help noticing because they were elements taken from me. At first it was nothing, however, that changed once dozens of things were taken. I could see it just by looking at his various expressions. Don't you want completion? Completeness begins with discarding the imperfections. Don't you want to become stronger? He asked with a distressed expression. I want to become stronger. However, I don't think of myself as incomplete. The things he took from me, I didn't think of them as my weaknesses. My clone had other thoughts, so I was different from him. Then he started running wild. Incomplete, you won't win over me. I don't think of myself as incomplete. Right now I was a little bit relaxed. Once I saw how wild he was, it seemed like I was going in the right direction. Incompleteness. What if you aren't incomplete? You won't be able to become the devil. It is a stalemate. Our standards are different. I raised wrath and the Emperor's sword. That person yelled out, never. You can never beat me unless you are complete. You are my weakness. Unlike my clone, I was confident. I took a deep breath. And I put down wrath and the Emperor's sword. What are you doing? I won't sell my soul to become stronger. And there was a mocking smile on my face. I won't tolerate anything of mine existing somewhere else. Come back. He and I were different. We would never be the same. However, there were similarities. I finally realized the reason. He was a part of me that had been split off. Deep into the mind, the part that I thought was weak had become independent. I didn't understand myself, so it showed my narrow-mindedness. The eyes of that guy with the same face shook violently. Drop it. This is the fastest route to completion. Don't you know it yourself? Haven't you realized the truth after facing the gods and going back in time? You clearly knew. There was such detail in the truth they told you. Then why? Why am I doing this? Yes, why? Your heart is being cleansed. Yet you are still hesitating? My hidden side. That's what I called my clone. I shook my head. The gods didn't ask me to become complete. After all, they admitted that they were incomplete. Of course, even without such complicated content, there is no way that I will follow the path someone else took. I would carve out my own path. The memories of my past life were only the foundation, and I would walk a new path. It wasn't always right, but I would somehow run towards the end. Perhaps I might have hesitated if my path was wrong. But now it was different. You will surely regret this. I was barely able to separate from you. Once you acknowledge it, this can no longer be reversed. Even if you are a part of me that I didn't care for, I will become more complete by acknowledging you. Sophistry. Just sophistry. Someone told me this. I was too young. My pride would tighten around my neck. However, the person who said it died by my hands. I fought Okulos who had broken the taboo. The winner would be right and Okulos was defeated. They were nothing more than words. Okay, wait and see. Your heart will be frustrated. My clone walked slowly forward like he had given up. I laughed and spread open my arms. And he entered me. The first thing I saw when I opened my eyes was a little fairy. You have woken up, master? Yee. I got up from my position. It was a small wooden building that seemed to be in the dark elf village. You haven't woken up in 3 days. Yee was really worried. Yee wiped away her tears with her fingers. 3 days? Has anything happened in the meantime? Chrisley left. The trees of life and death have grown safely and 7 candidates for the king were nominated. Yee asked, and 2 of them are humans that master know. Chrisley told me that dozens of days ago. Yee blinked. Huh? That is strange. Yee was only told a few days ago. The conversation didn't fit. I sensed something and asked. Yee, what is today's date? The 12th of September. It is a little bit colder now. Yee doesn't like the cold. 12th of September? What's wrong, master? Nothing. I slightly frowned. The first time I went to the Tree of Origin and fought my clone was on September the 9th. It had only been 3 days since then. Even the conversation with Chrisley. Was it a vision? I recalled Martin's eyes, but I didn't remember directly implanting them. Yet it seemed like I obtained a little bit of his power. I wasn't sure what was happening. Or is this also the impact of power of domination? Perhaps power of domination was triggered when Martin was dying. I saw a lot of messages during the massacre of creatures, so I didn't pay attention to everything. At any rate, if time hasn't passed, then my stats wouldn't have changed. My stats had risen as I struggled with the clone. Although some had been decreased, a considerable number had still risen. I would be upset if it was all in vain. Status window. I opened my status window for confirmation. Name: Randolph Brigzeal. Occupation: Demon Grand Duke, Dungeon Master. Title: * Dungeon Hunter. Residual stats +1 when occupying dungeons and hunting demons. * Indomitable Warrior, XU, all stats +2. * first to receive a fairy's blessing. U, magic power +6. * Origin Master, Epic, all stats +3. * Undead, XU, intelligence and stamina +5. * Ruler of the Underground World. Legend, all stats +5. The rating of all skills below epic grade +0.5. Stats: Strength, 89, +20. Intelligence, 96, +15. Agility, 85, +20. Stamina, 90, +22. Magic power, 100, +16. Potential, 460 +93 570. Remaining stat points. 14. Electric power. 21 gigawatts. Uniqueness. The master of the underground world. The heart of the Hell Monarch has completely awakened. Skill. Combine everything, XU. Mind's Eye. Epic. Dark Sword. Epic. Divine Sword Unity. Epic. Passive. Lightning Elemental. Epic. Pride. Epic. Corruption. X Epic. Power of Domination. X Epic. Passive. Spirit Communication. Epic. Passive. Skill and item effects. Wrath. Strength +7. Sloth. Agility +7. Pride. Stamina +7. Divine Sword Unity. Strength and Agility +3. Before and after comparison. Strength 105, Intelligence 107, Agility 100, Stamina 107, Magic 113, Potential 434 plus 93 555. Strength 109, Intelligence 111, Agility 105, Stamina 112, Magic 116, Potential 460 plus 93 570. I stiffened after checking the status window. My pure stats, they had soared. My stats had climbed by more than 20. Laughter emerged. I wasn't expecting it. I was honestly glad to see it. I had fought in a dream, so it was natural to think everything would be reset. But the results were completely different. Even the potential threshold went up. I hadn't done anything specific. I just didn't recognize myself. Enlightenment was enlightenment, but I hadn't expected it. Before checking the system, I thought that my stats were at my original level. I'm not frustrated but full of hope. A corner of my mouth went up. The clone said I would be frustrated, but I didn't feel any frustration. Master? Yi cocked her head and asked. Release the spirits. It is time to contract with the humans. Yes, Master. By the way, Master. Did something happen? Your face looks very good, Master. Yi. I don't have an answer. Hying, really good. Yi swelled up and moved to begin the mission. Chapter 191 to 192, Spirit Contract. The growth of the spirits was smooth. Ray and Sarah weren't the only intermediate spirits, as more than 10 had already joined them. The spirits had also developed their egos and were no longer dependent on me. There was a clear difference in rewards between the lowest grade, low grade, intermediate and advanced spirits. Not all spirits would be able to reach the higher ranks. Experience was experience, but they needed to go through special occasions to enter the path of evolution. It was difficult to reach the upper hierarchy of the spirits. Looking at the compensation from the skill, Spirit Communication, the low grade gave 500 PT, the intermediate grade 5,000 PT and the advanced grade 500,000 point. It jumped up by 100 times once it reached intermediate grade. After filling up Yi's empty spots, the spirits had learned how to communicate. Originally I had scheduled the contract with humans for later, but I changed my mind. The awakened were growing due to the trees of life and death, so it was an appropriate time for the spirits to form contracts. The double contract will make it easier to move the humans. There were approximately 100,000 spirits. All of them were already contracted to me. It was normally impossible, but I guessed it was due to the great fire that I had. Thanks to this, I could forcibly destroy the second contract with the humans if I wanted to. It was good enough to send out the spirits and quietly move behind the humans. Father, please find Sarah and IA contractor. Yes, please. Ray and Sarah, who had the bodies of adults, came to visit me. The two of them were now able to change into a shape similar to humans. Just like their names, they looked like normal girls, but the difference was their hair was made of fire. I was sitting on a chair made of stone near the tree of origin. It was the first time I was sitting down without any thoughts and worries. Usually I would split the time with training, but I wasn't feeling motivated at all. This was the effect of swallowing up the clone. It wasn't a bad feeling. However, Ray and Sarah had interrupted my first break. Are you asking me to find them? That, not one child has made a contract yet. We would like to try a demonstration first. I'm sorry. Ray and Sarah sensed my anger and shrank back. I sat back and rubbed my brow. So you want to form a contract? Yes. It will be enough if we demonstrate it to the children. We are connected, so they will receive the knowledge. That's right. Ray responded as sincerely as possible. That is an obstacle. Even if they knew how to communicate, none of the fire spirits had left the dungeon. Looking for a contractor themselves would be unrealistic. That's why Ray and Sarah came to me for advice. Sitting motionlessly would delay the work. Ray and Sarah's contractors. Both were special. They were the first ones to evolve into intermediate spirits and followed me the best. They showed the most growth among the mid-level spirits. In the near future, one of them might become an advanced spirit. The first contract was very important, so it wouldn't hurt finding someone special for them. There was a good reason to set an example. However, I couldn't think of someone suitable. Yoon Hai and Edward? Neither of them would benefit greatly from the intermediate spirits. By default, a spirit should be compatible with the contractor and grow with them while fighting together. The two of them had polished their basic techniques, so they likely wouldn't help the spirits. The spirits also ate a lot of magic power. Kim Yura and Kim Min-ji. I nodded. Strictly speaking, they were under my control but were currently humans outside the dungeon. This might be able to solve Kim Min-ji's problem. The spirits had been a great help in recovering Yi's soul. Kim Min-ji had also lost her spirit. Both of them had awakened as very strong saintesses. At the same time, the synergy between them was greatly amplified. I knew this, so there was no reason not to use it. In order to do that, some ego needed to be restored. Right now they're outside the dungeon, so I need to look for them. Kim Yura had suggested going outside the dungeon for her sister's recovery. She hoped that seeing familiar sights would help. I readily allowed it, so now they were walking among crowds of humans. All the conditions were met. Follow me. I will introduce you to your contractors. Yes, father. I'm excited. I laughed and started to move. Ray and Sarah followed behind me. Kim Yura was wandering around South Korea with her sister. She had a lot of hope as she walked with her sister. After awakening, all of Kim Yura's wounds were healed and her stamina was so great she could walk around for hours. Unfortunately, their fortunes had reversed and Kim Min-ji was now the one in the wheelchair. Isn't this a nice place? There were partly destroyed buildings and overgrown weeds, but Kim Yura was delighted. Although her sister wasn't in a normal condition, she was still alive. The only problem was her spirit. On the surface, her artificial lower body looked no different from other people. It is all thanks to Savior Nim. It was believable that he was the dungeon master, but he was her greatest benefactor. He saved her sister's life. In addition, he was the savior. Kim Yura thought there was some reason for him to be the dungeon master. He was acting behind the scenes while saving the world. If not, Kim Yura didn't know what to do if he was truly the enemy of humans. For now, her sister came first. She didn't doubt that her sister would return to normal. In that sense, she deserved to be called the saintess. It is time to leave. We've been here too long. Kim Yura looked around. People were wandering around vigorously. In addition, they bowed as soon as they saw Kim Yura. Ah, Saintess Nim, are you taking a walk? Saintess Nim, my injured shoulder is fine. Thank you. Kim Yura responded with a small smile. Saintess. In fact, her healing was much stronger than those with the occupation priest. She could even delay or cure terminal illnesses, so it was like a miracle. At first, she only healed injured people, but rumors spread and many people came looking for her. In the meantime, she started to be called the Saintess. In fact, she was the Saintess. There isn't much time to delay here. Kim Yura's eyes darkened. From that moment on, her house was the dungeon. Her chest had become tight after leaving the dungeon. She didn't know why, but she guessed it was related to the savior. Kim Yura had to solve the problem with her sister as soon as possible in order to return. Spending more time outside would be ingratitude. She hadn't even been able to say thank you yet. I have to leave quietly in the evening. Kim Yura made a decision. She had stayed in this village for too long. The people had been kind to her so far. But they might change if she left the area. Min-ji, is the sky clear? I can hear the sound of crying insects. Kim Yura made a decision deep in her heart and talked to her sister Kim Min-ji. There was no answer, but she just continued. The sun had set and the moon was rising. A clear evening. It was time for everyone to go to bed. Kim Yura quietly left the village. I'm a little sorry. The villagers were good-natured. They heard rumors that she was the saintess, so they gave her a home and food. She only had to sometimes cure patients. She was able to leisurely spend time with her sister, so she wasn't too stingy with the treatments. Min-ji, we have to cross a mountain. Please put up with a little inconvenience. The only way out of the village was through the mountain. It was a tough place to climb in a wheelchair, but Kim Yura had awakened. She could push it with strength. Duck, duduk. The sound of rocks being kicked was heard. They had been climbing for a while and Kim Yura frowned as she smelled blood. Definitely, the smell of people bleeding. Even if she disliked the scent, it couldn't be helped. If someone was injured, then Kim Yura needed to treat them. She walked for 5 minutes and arrived at the source of the blood. At the same time, Kim Yura was at a loss for words. Aren't you just scum? You should just die. Hey, a vain effort. Vain effort. That awakened could handle a sword pretty well. I hurt my leg. The injured will go see the saintess in the morning. Our saintess Nim will cure you. Bodies were on the ground while people were sitting on top of them. They were people from the village. They seemed to be hunting humans. Duke. The wheelchair moved across a twig and made a sound. At the same time, the villagers turned their attention towards Kim Yura. Huh? Saintess Nim? Where are you going in the middle of the night? Their eyes were half blurred. They had taken drugs. Kim Yura frowned and said, what is going on? Why are you fighting people? Even though they were caught, they maintained casual attitudes. They shrugged and laughed at Kim Yura. We want to live. It can't be helped. Yet Saintess Nim somehow caught us. Saintess Nim is indispensable. The death rate significantly reduced after Saintess Nim came. Kilkul. Saintess Nim. This part of me is injured, so can you treat it? They didn't hesitate to spit out obscene jokes. Crazy. For sure. They were all drunk. At the same time, they were dangerous. She didn't know what they were going to do. 8 people. Could she deal with all of them? I have to. She would rather die, but her sister wouldn't be able to run away. So, this is why I can't believe in people. People who seemed good could do wicked deeds like this. Kim Yura carefully tied the wheelchair to a tree and bit her lip. They continued to talk. It is a little troublesome to fight you. If your legs are cut off, will you still be able to heal? Are we going to cut them? You idiot, of course. Will the cells die if everything is attached? The young have a strange color, hoo. In the meantime, I've learned ways to prevent death. Isn't that face better than a few celebrities? I'll go first. Preferences should be given to seniors. It was a tiring conversation. They approached like they were taking a walk. Kim Yura pulled out a small knife. She had no other skills and brought it for self-defense, but it was better than nothing. Awakening strengthened the entire body. Despite the men being awakened, she wouldn't be an easy target. It was a problem if she was caught, but she couldn't allow them to get at her sister. It will poke me. Will you stab me with it when I approach? Agu tilde I'm scared. In their eyes, Kim Yura was just a toy. I can't allow myself to be beaten. Kim Yura tried to calm herself as much as possible. She had experienced many harsh things in her life, so she wouldn't panic. In these circumstances, it would be advantageous to hit first rather than wait. Huck. She lowered her body slightly and scratched the skin of the man in the lead. It wasn't a fatal injury, but the scratch on his cheek was bleeding. Shit, this bitch is crazy. The man whose face was scratched burst out. He never imagined a surprise attack. It was a pity for Kim Yura. He was hurt but wouldn't have any problems moving. In the end, it seemed like a situation where she had to deal with 8 people. Holy armor. It was a skill that surrounded her body in holy power. In fact, Kim Yura awakened as a saintess, but she didn't have any attack skills. Healing and defense were the main ones. Holy armor wrapped a wall around her that minimized damage. A unique rated skill. A decent awakened wouldn't be able to leave a scratch on her. Kim Yura moved with the armor around her body. What is this? The knife isn't going in. The men panicked as the knife didn't pierce the skin. Meanwhile, Kim Yura moved the knife and stabbed a man's thigh. Kuik. The stabbed man sat down. It was possible to take his life, but Kim Yura stopped, believing that was enough to stop him fighting. I can do it. Gulp. She swallowed her saliva. It was the first time she had to take care of people like this. Her life, along with her sister's, was at risk. Her sister couldn't run away, so she needed to handle it as quickly as possible. That bitch? At this point, the men couldn't easily rush towards her. They thought she was a cornered deer or mouse, only to find out differently. What are you doing against a woman? Pull yourselves together, you idiots. The man with his thighs stabbed cried out loudly. The confused group immediately changed attitudes. They had needed to survive in a world of creatures. They instinctively sensed danger from Kim Yura. The men realized there was no chance of victory if they didn't move. Ha, ha, Kim Yura panted harshly. It was fortunate that the level of the male awakened were below average. They were hunting civilians, but Kim Yura, who awakened as a saintess, was different from them. If she had a little more experience, then they wouldn't have gotten this far. The men's expressions changed over time. As 1, 2 and 3 men fell, they couldn't ignore her anymore. Kim Yura licked her lips and took a stance. If you approach, then I will kill you. It was the first time that she had blood on her hands. She tried to stop her hands from trembling. She glared poisonously at the men. It was a world where only the strong survived. The weak were killed. Even if they were weak, being able to survive until now was enough to be considered strong. Saintess Nim, look here. It was at that moment. She was confronting the 5 men when she heard a voice behind her. She turned around. She saw the first man she stabbed with a knife to Minji's neck. An ordinary person wouldn't be able to move easily with a stabbed thigh, but Kim Yura had overlooked that he was an awakened. She had placed an awakened on the same level as the general public. Put the knife down. Yes, you wouldn't want marks on the pretty neck of your sister. Ah, the villages knew how much Kim Yura took care of her sister. The flustered faces of the men started to recover. Kim Yura's face paled. It was the end the moment she put down the knife. For her and her sister. However, she couldn't let her sister be harmed. You're not putting it down? Should I show Saintess Nim her blood? Stop, I am putting it down. Down. Kim Yura closed her eyes at the man's intimidation. She slowly placed the small knife on the floor. At that moment, the men ran up to Kim Yura and pushed her to the ground. Kim Yura sensed her future. She could take damage to her body, but her sister was the problem. My sister, don't touch my sister. It depends on how sweetly Saintess Nim submits to us. Isn't that right, friends? Yes, yes, we won't kill you. The man holding her sister hostage shrugged and the others agreed. However, their eyes still weren't normal. Ah, God, would it have been better to avoid the people when she smelled blood? Or was treating injured people a sin? All the good people died. All that was left in the world were those who sinned. She shouldn't have trusted, it was her mistake. She didn't know why this was happening to her and her sister. Do you want to contract with me? At that moment, a voice was heard in her head. Hallucination? I am Ray, a proud name my father gave me. If you form a contract with me, then I will defeat all those humans. The voice she was hearing became more evident. It was a girl's voice. However, there was no girl in the area. Quickly, it will be too late soon. It will be different. There was a possibility that was a hallucination caused by her own desire. However, she was already on a cliff. The contract, I agree. Waruruk. At the end of her words, flames appeared out of thin air. Fire? Ack. The flames grew largely and started to swallow up the men. It was so powerful that their skin was quickly melted. What? Shit, what is this? The man holding the knife to Kim Minji's neck was dismayed as he saw the other men killed by the flames. He tried to escape but couldn't run quickly due to his thigh. Auk! The flames burned the last man. The flames moved in front of Kim Yura and transformed into a female. I am pleased to meet you, despite the urgent situation. As I said before, my name is Ray. What is contractor's name? It happened in an instant. Kim Yura had barely recovered her mental state. She replied in a terrified voice. You, Ra, Kim Yura, let's do our best in the future. The beautiful girl with hair made of flames smiled. I was watching the scene from afar. Intermediate or lower ranked spirits had to sign a contract before they could be seen. Despite already having a contract with me, they weren't capable of showing themselves to others without a contractor. Kim Yura will stand out thanks to the spirit contract. Kim Yura the Saintess. She would attract people's attention everywhere she went. After Ray, the spirits would continue to extend their contracts among the humans. I decided not to intervene and gave Ray full authority. The more that the spirits contracted with humans, the stronger my forces would become. I wish there was a way to obtain spirits with other attributes. In order to do that, I needed to raise the fire spirits properly. It wouldn't be difficult to enter the spirit world and I could use them to appeal to other spirit kings. I would also receive additional rewards if I returned the fire spirits that I raised. There were many things that would benefit me if I looked ahead. Now I need to go see Maxim. There is currently a truce between Upa and Isle, so I need to help Upa and Ariel. Upa had the advantage, so I added Maxim to balance the odds. And Maxim lost a lot of power while trying to hinder Upa. If I didn't refill his troops while there was a truce, there would no longer be another chance. 5 million points should be enough. I calculated the points I would use to buy additional troops for Maxim and moved back to the dungeon. Troops could be purchased from the achievements store. It contained a number of the Hell Monarch's treasures, with many of them not being opened yet. The treasure is further divided into warehouses, and opening them requires points or achievement points. I touched my jaw. Hell Monarch's warehouse. There were multiple warehouses. Not all of them were released immediately. It took a considerable amount to open the warehouses, so I had placed them on hold. I won't need to use points for a while, so it wouldn't be bad to open one. I looked through the long list. Sealed warehouse list. Opening the sealed warehouses can be purchased using points. Magic weapons warehouse 1,500 achievement points or 2,500,000 PT. Unknown secret warehouse 2,000 achievement points or 3,200,000 PT. Scrolls warehouse 1,000 achievement points or 2 million PT. Skeleton soldiers warehouse 2,500 achievement points or 4 million PT. I had around 10,000 achievement points. My normal points were around 15 million. It wasn't at a level where opening one warehouse would be a burden. Maxim needs soldiers. Skeletons will be perfect. There were few skeleton soldiers. Most magicians were reluctant to release their recipe for creating them. However, there was a high probability that there would be general skeleton soldiers in the warehouse. I need to open the skeleton soldiers warehouse. -4 million PT have been used to unlock the skeleton soldiers warehouse. The achievements store will list the types of soldiers stored in the skeleton soldiers warehouse. I nodded. I used normal points to unlock the seal for the warehouse. Another list appeared in front of me. Skeleton soldiers warehouse. Skeleton warlock 100 achievement points or 100,000 PT. Skeleton guardian 300 achievement points or 400,000 PT. Chaos soldier 1,000 achievement points or 1,300,000 PT. Bone dragon 3,000 or 4 million PT. Chapter 193 to 196. Magician of the Moon. There were 4 types of skeletons. In particular, the warlock and guardian were familiar names that I had seen a few times in my previous life. They had been mass-produced by Pandemonium, but individually, they weren't very strong. But the Chaos Soldier was unfamiliar. Not only that, the next item was enough to amaze me. Bone Dragon, a high-class 2 LV creature. I could purchase a maximum of 2 of them. The Hell Monarch possessed a great number of high-class creatures. The Hell Monarch was someone who tried to become a god. Someone who reached a level that was impossible for humans and caused fear in demons. It wasn't strange that he would place a lot of high-class creatures in the underground world. Maybe there were other similar high-class creatures in the sealed warehouses. Conceding in quality, I touched my jaw. I could fill the numbers with warlocks and guardians, but there might be better strategies. Anyway, Maxim engaged in guerrilla warfare rather than a frontal battle. He could pressure the opponent with small numbers. Maxim's fighting ability was efficient. In terms of strategy, Maxim was better than me. Then, I nodded as I decided to make a purchase. It would be a considerable expenditure, but it was well worth the investment. Belém, Brazil in South America. In the past, it was a port city that was the center of commerce and transportation. It originally had a population of over 1 million people. However, now it was so devastated that it was hard to find any people. Maxim was in the center. He led 5,000 skeleton soldiers, but he only succeeded in delaying for some time. Of course, that alone was great. He moved the army while avoiding being caught by Upa. But that didn't last long. The 5,000 soldiers had been reduced to only 2,000. The quality of the skeleton soldiers wasn't very good, so there was a limit. It is too bad that a resupply of troops is needed. Maxim muttered from near the shore. The soldiers were made from dead bodies. They didn't need to eat. The problem was that their rate of recruitment was much slower. He turned his head and saw a pile of bones a short distance away. 2 liches were commanding the soldiers and combining the bones. There were human bones, creature bones and animal bones, but not all of them could be used to create soldiers. Even if it isn't a surprise, Kuang. He didn't know when the enemy would come to interfere. It didn't make sense for there to be no obstacles, but he secured some bases. Then he had been ambushed by some of Grand Duke Upa's troops late at night. He was a bit late and almost lost all the soldiers. They were able to be preserved due to Maxiam's skill. Now is the perfect time to restore some of the troops. Upa had stopped advancing. He was stationed in South Africa and didn't move. At first Maxiam was nervous because he thought something was discovered, but that wasn't the case. The sacred zone that occurred caused the demons to reduce their activities. Anyway, now was the chance to increase his troops without any interruptions. He had never been able to stay more than 5 days in one place, so the speed of production was very slow. Is the work going well? Maxiam approached the 2 liches and asked. These humans, too weak. Good bones, not many. Speed up the pace anyway. It should be twice as quick. Hands, more help. 2 people, there is a limit. The liches' voices were adamant. They collected dead bodies and extracted the bones. The materials weren't very good, so there was a limit of 30 created per day. The skeleton soldiers moved and collected the bones. Clattering filled the surrounding area, but Maxiam wasn't satisfied. His Majesty entrusted this task to me. If I stop here, then I won't be able to maintain my pride. The underground world, vacant and empty. Maxiam was called the cruel commander. Unlike the other commanders, he maintained his neutrality and stayed out of the fight for the treasure trove. He might have been sitting still, but in truth, he was maintaining his troops for when His Majesty would return. If someone truly aimed at the treasure trove, then he would move, but he was half exhausted. Then he was forcibly summoned to a strange world and heard the sound of the heart. It was at this time that he discovered what he needed to do. After returning to the underground world from Earth, he instantly started to stop the battle between commanders. Then he was surprised when His Majesty came to the underground world. He didn't like the word fate, but he devoted his loyalty to His Majesty on that day. He was entrusted an important task, so he couldn't stop here. I need to hit the weak dungeons. It was a bit extreme, but it was the most obvious way. He had a rough idea of where the dungeons in Upa's faction were located. If he occupied the weakest one, then he would be able to restore all his power at once. The problem was after that, Upa wouldn't be able to stay still. He couldn't act rashly. Walk. Kawuong. It happened while Maxiam was looking to see if there was another way. Giant stones started to fall all over the place, the ground was torn and flames appeared. These signs, Earl Errand. His magic power was unique. He had sensed it the other day when he was ambushed by Errand. Now he was somehow in the rear. Maxiam looked towards the sea and saw a few krakens and huge boats. He hadn't noticed at all until they moved. If he made a mistake, then it was a mistake, but it didn't make any sense. I put up as many defenses as possible. How? The liches installed magic warnings in various spots and soldiers were placed in the surroundings. Yet he hadn't heard any news. They started attacking before he noticed. There is a magician with great talent. It was impossible for a lich to compare to a magician with a lot of skill. Maxiam urgently pulled out his sword. Keep your ranks and respond. He was determined. Anyway, it seemed like this fight wouldn't be easy. Earl Errand, a member of Upa's faction, smiled while revealing his teeth. Hoo-hoo, your face is an amusing sight. You didn't notice until I got behind you. Errand was ordered to kill Maxiam. But whenever he approached, his target would run away like a ghost. He wasn't able to catch Maxiam. Sometimes Maxiam would hide for hours. It was also difficult to deal with Maxiam in a one-on-one fight because he was the leader of an army and at least a high-class 3LV creature. But it would end today. Errand laughed and looked back. There was someone sitting on all fours like a dog, and their long hair made it difficult to tell if they were a man or woman. Upa had given them to Errand directly. A magician who could even deceive high-class creatures. They were very useful despite having some limitations. Upa Nim gave me this opportunity. I must use it. Maxiam, a death knight. He didn't know where Maxiam came from, but he had to catch him this time. He might be an event like the angels, but it was strange that 2 would be occurring at the same time. There was a chance someone had caused his appearance. There is no place to escape. Death awaits on land, ocean, and even underneath you. Errand raised his hand. At the same time, one of his skills, Earth Explosion, was used. Kwang. Fire and earth rose up on all sides. The hot flames swallowed up the skeleton soldiers and melted their bones. It was the worst situation, but he was a seasoned veteran. Maxim had already set up movement magic in preparation for a situation like this. There was a restriction that large amounts of materials were needed and the magic circle couldn't be moved, but it was necessary when preparing a base. The liches and main soldiers need time to get away. It took a considerable amount of time for the movement magic to activate. That time needed to be earned. In this situation, he had to survive, even if all his troops were lost, because Maxim was worth more than them. However, he couldn't assume failure from the beginning and retreat alone. Maxim aimed to buy some time. His sword shone a brilliant gold and he swept it around him. A Cerberus and many other creatures around him were wiped out. Errand. Maxim only had eyes for one person. Earl Errand. Next to him was an unidentified creature. That guy. Ah. He realized it immediately. That guy was the magician. The magic power flowing around him was very different. I have to kill him. It wouldn't end with just this. They had obviously planned for a surprise of this scale. A magician was very dangerous when chasing someone. It was very risky. If he lives, then he will be a stumbling block to His Majesty. At the very least, it was more urgent to get rid of the magician than Errand. The liches had no way of matching the magician's black magic. No matter how strong His Majesty was, the magician would be troublesome. So, it was best to cut off the bud now. Sword. Huang. The sword trembled and the gold light spread out more widely. Shortly after that, Maxim ignored all creatures and started running. I scowled. Strange. The crystal ball I gave to Maxim before he left had lost its light. It was proof that it was destroyed or couldn't be contacted. If something happened, then it would have been reported. However, it was clear that something had abruptly happened. Maxim would have noticed if someone was about to ambush him. Maxim had an outstanding ability as a commander. He wouldn't be caught off guard. He always prepared a few things in case something happened. But there were some doubts. I didn't feel good. After getting some foresight, my senses had become more sharp. If I felt like this, 9 out of 10 times I was right. Crunch. Dalguric. A sound came from the rear while I was looking into the crystal ball. I turned around and 2 unusual skeletons greeted me. Chaos Soldier. 8 legs reminiscent of a spider and 2 torsos. Of course, there were 2 heads and 4 arms. They were all made of bones and had a geometric look. Both of them were Chaos Soldiers. I immediately opened Mind's Eye and saw their status windows. Name. Chaos Soldier. Stats. Strength 101, Intelligence 66. Agility 88, Stamina 99. Magic Power 77. Potential 431 431. Uniqueness. Born in the midst of chaos, a powerful skeleton soldier. Skill. Chaos and Destruction. Epic, Seconds Acceleration, XU. They had a very good quality for skeletons. There was also 1 epic grade skill. Typically, creatures could be bought that surpassed the limit of general creatures. The 2 Chaos Soldiers followed behind me as I moved. We eventually reached the entrance of the dungeon where some creatures were waiting. 2 Bone Dragons. They were more expensive than expected, but there would be no harm if I bought them. If I had bought the Bone Dragons from the Demon World auction, they would have been more than 56 million points due to the competition. Their bodies were close to 100 meters long. Their wings were even bigger. There were even 2 of them. It was hard not to feel overwhelmed. I slowly climbed on top of one dragon. The Chaos Soldiers boarded the other Bone Dragon and grabbed the reins. The combination of Chaos Soldiers and Bone Dragons would give me an unimaginable destructive power. Of course, it wasn't a demonic dragon, but it was still a dragon. Dragons were arrogant and prideful. It was almost impossible to make them follow someone. I had been very envious of demons who managed to obtain a dragon as a mount. Now I was able to fly directly on a Bone Dragon. Weaker than a demonic dragon, the Bone Dragon was the strongest among the undead. Master Tilda, where are you going? Yi, who was napping, rubbed her eyes and asked. I am going to meet Maxim. Report if anything urgent happens. Yi will do her best. Yi. I didn't have great faith in her, but Yi had matured a little bit after the accident. If there was an urgent matter, then she would be the first to report it. Of course, her version of urgent might be different, but both Chrisley and Tashmal were busy. Talk to Julium about small things. Julium of the Dark Elves was somewhat trustworthy. Yi swelled up like she was upset. Trust Yi, master. No problem will be able to escape from my eyes. I was glad. I kicked the bone dragon lightly. Kua. The bone dragon roared and spread open its wings. As the Chaos Soldiers grabbed the reins more tightly, the bone dragons quickly left the dungeon entrance. Take care, Tilda. Yi bowed as carefully as possible. The last contact was in Brazil. I was told that they were hiding in a small city called Belém. It was quite far away, but the dragon's speed was more than I imagined. I was able to reach the destination in only half a day. It was adjacent to the sea, but the city was already ruined. The corpses and bones of all types of creatures were strewn around. I got down from the dragon, looked around and came to a conclusion. There was a surprise raid. It was in the immediate vicinity. It was literally a raid. It was unexpected and Maxium was greatly damaged. Fortunately, I couldn't see Maxium's body anywhere. The culprit was one of the demons in Upa's faction, but I was skeptical as I saw the remnants of a fierce battle. He wouldn't lose thousands of creatures in one step. In the meantime, I hadn't bothered going out. In order to interfere with Upa and Ariel, I had crammed a fishing rod between them. Maxium obstructed them. He played that role for me. I have to find him. Maxium had many uses. He couldn't be lost in a place like this. Look around. If you see anything strange, then notify me straight away. Sui. 100 shades started to move. After losing contact, I had brought the shades just in case. Approximately 30 minutes later, the shades started returning. Most of them found nothing, but a few discovered markings. Movement magic. Shabby markings. It was half erased, but it was unmistakably a magic circle for movement magic. It took a considerable amount of time and materials to set up the movement magic. No other demons were staying here, so Maxium must have been the one to set it up. It was a precautionary measure in case he was attacked without notice. The flow of magic power is broken. Unfortunately, I discovered that the magic power circuit of the movement magic was completely blocked. I couldn't chase after the flow of magic power. Someone followed Maxium and deliberately blocked the flow of magic power. I raised a hand to my forehead. If Maxium was attacked and had to evacuate quickly, then there would be no way for him to block the magic circuit. It certainly wouldn't benefit Maxium. Why? The enemy must believe that Maxium had a helper. There are some doubts, but it is almost certain. My thoughts weren't foolish. Anyway, it was a wise judgment by the enemy. Thanks to this, I was blocked here. I didn't have the ability to recover the traces that had been erased. While searching around, I found a sword in the ruins. This, Maxium's sword. I grabbed the ordinary-looking sword. It was obviously the sword that Maxium used. The sword gave off a splendid golden color when fighting the enemy, but it usually looked plain like this. Maybe this was the reason why the enemy didn't find the sword. They had always seen it shining brightly in Maxium's hands. I injected magic power into the sword. A faint golden aura surrounded the sword. Bururu. At that moment, the sword shook. I moved it and the sword stopped shaking. I did the same thing and the sword shook again. The sword is responding to the southeast. I nodded. The sword wasn't shaking for no reason. It was almost unprecedented, but it wasn't strange for a sword to develop an ego after being used for a long time. Maxium had used this sword for more than 1,000 years. It wasn't a complete ego sword, but it knew where its master was. I left the ruins. Then I got on the dragon and said, "To the southeast." All of South America was Upa's area. I couldn't move around wildly. It could be a problem if I was caught. Somebody came. A demon near here, Drummond? He was a demon who had considerable attachment to this area. He fiercely pursued me with dozens of wyverns. Speed up. However, the wyverns couldn't keep up with the bone dragon's speed. Puong. The bone dragons spread open their wings and flew even quicker. There were a few more chases by the time I got to the place where the sword reacted strongly. It was a place with a lot of mountains and Maxium was clearly somewhere here. Wait here. I was bound to be discovered when moving with the bone dragons. I hid their bodies as much as possible and moved alone. The Chaos Soldiers were also near the dragons. The smell of death. My frown deepened as I entered the mountains. There were no traces of creatures, but an unpleasant smell was hanging around. It was a similar smell to when I killed the commanders in the underground world. It was very weak but still awful. However, This was Earth and the only commander was Maxim. This smell obviously came from Maxim. I won't know until I check. Unless Upa came out directly, I never thought Maxim would be so easily hit by others. Tisk. I clicked my tongue as I moved. I moved in the direction that Maxim's sword pointed to and soon found a cave. There was a strong smell coming from inside the cave. Here, Maxim was in here. The inside of the cave was quite long. I didn't see any other soldiers at all. Soon, deep inside the cave, I found Maxim collapsed against a wall. He was losing consciousness. It was difficult to tell if he was dead or alive simply by his appearance. Maxim. I opened my magic power and gave him some strength. After waiting dozens of seconds, Maxim moved slightly. Emperor, Your Majesty? Maxim tried to stand up after recognizing me. I stopped him and said, "That's right, you don't need to get up. Just explain what happened." Moon. Enormous magic power of the moon, magician. Maxim's story ended there. He lost consciousness again. I slowly laid my hands on Maxim's shoulders. A non-demonic magician. If the opponent was a demon, then he would have said the name. All Maxim said was, magician. However, I didn't have any memories of a moon magician. Some human awakened had similar names, but it was impossible for them to face Maxim at their level. It didn't fit. Upa must have done something. I shook my head. First I had to treat Maxim. Maxim recovered his senses 2 days later. In the meantime, I watched the surroundings from deep in the mountains. It was because there were demons in the surroundings. They weren't chasing after me. They were certainly looking for Maxim. What happened? Shortly after Maxim woke up, I asked him bluntly. His body was already dead, so there was no need to restore his physical strength. Maxim quickly kneeled down. I was taken by surprise. I know, but I don't understand. A quick raid shouldn't have done this. Did I overestimate you? All the soldiers were wiped out. Maxim alone survived. No matter how high level the demons, there were few who surpassed Maxim. The one who did this, I couldn't imagine. I'm sorry, Your Majesty. My abilities were lacking. I couldn't do anything against the demon Erend. Earl Erend led the raid. I was familiar with him. In the past, he was an earl who was fairly strong. He was one of the earls in Upa's faction. Maxim slightly raised his head. His eyes flashed as he said, "That's right." But there was a nondescript person next to Erend. A mighty magician with the power of the moon. An unusual magician who turned the surroundings into night in an instant. Maxim had said that moments before he collapsed. I had been curious about this part. Furthermore, it seemed like the magician had hurt Maxim. Give me the details. He can turn an area into night. The space is isolated, so I didn't notice until I entered it. And he had an invincible power inside it, the area. Of course, Your Majesty is stronger. In short, his abilities were to blame for Maxim not noticing the raid. This was a part that I had been dubious about. It means the magician is strong. My eyes narrowed. A magician that used the majestic power of the moon. It was a bit surprising. If Upa has such a person under him, then they would have been advantageous in the fight against Ariel. No, if there was such a magician, then I would have heard about it. Chrisley had visited many enemy territories around the world. Is there a reason why they can't be used? He was called the Magician of the Moon. Anyone would have used him against Ariel. There was no reason to hide it. Maybe the magician was testing his strength against Maxim. Upa, what did you do? I pressed a hand against my forehead. The Magician of the Moon was likely to be within the area of transcendence. Or maybe he could exert his strength under special conditions. He was obtained from either a summoning or special accomplishment. Anyway, he was certainly an unexpected variable. Is that all you found out? Erend is controlling the magician. He is always located next to Erend. If I monitored Erend, then I would be able to know where the Magician of the Moon was. However, it meant entering the domain of night. Maxim hadn't noticed until he entered it. Would it escape my detection? There is nothing as difficult as the unknown. I stood at the crossroads of choice. It wouldn't matter if I ignored it. I could gain something by default. The aim was to kill the winner of the fight between Ariel and Upa. However, if Upa had a subordinate that was as powerful as a transcendent person, then the game was already over. If he sent out the magician, then it would lead to overwhelming victory. Then Upa would become an even bigger opponent. It was tricky. Cutting off the bud. This was one of the options, but it had to be handled quietly. Maxim, we need a plan to quietly bring out the magician of the moon. At the very least, a one-on-one fight with me needs to be created. I was inferior when it came to tactics. I didn't know much. This was a problem in the past, but now I had subordinates who could do it for me. And Maxim was quite reliable in that area. Maxim thought for a while before opening his mouth. But I require quite a few soldiers. Maxim was very careful when he started to speak again. I briefly answered, I can't give you a lot. Giving him additional troops was a stumbling block. Currently Upa's demons were surrounding this area and watching. It was fortunate that I came here with 2 bone dragons and 2 chaos soldiers. If there were more creatures, then it would have been difficult to stay undetected. A lot of soldiers aren't required. Quality is more important. That is a simple matter. Follow me. This place was inside a cave. I led Maxim outside and slowly released a little of my magic power. Eventually, I led him through a dense forest. Bone dragons and chaos soldiers. Is that enough? There were 4 high-class creatures. It was enough power to capture 1 dungeon. Maxim's body trembled. It has been a long time since I've seen them. They were there when the Emperor first created the underground world. He also knew the Chaos Soldiers. Maxim was the Hell Monarch's oldest knight. It wasn't strange. Maxim then continued. That is enough. No, it is more than enough. Tying up Aaron's feet and separating the magician of the moon. I will leave it to you. Me? These creatures can only be moved by your majesty. I will leave them to you. I will take care of the rest. Maxim stared at me blankly before forming a fist. His eyes also changed. He was full of desire to do so. After a moment, Maxim bowed even deeper. New Maxim, I will follow your majesty's order. Aaron was frantic to catch Maxim. Aaron had persistently followed and harassed Maxim. Maxim was aiming for this. Your majesty, please be patient. I will settle this in a week. Are you that confident? It would be hard with me alone. But the bone dragons and chaos soldiers are the same as having 500,000 allies. How can I fail? It was natural that the operation would be a success. Then be careful, your majesty. The magician of the moon has strange magic. I couldn't understand everything. I wasn't offended by his remark. A mysterious magician who even fooled Maxim. It was enough to be tense. There is nobody in this world who can beat me, I said confidently. In fact, those words weren't wrong. Even if the magician of the moon showed up, I was still the strongest in this area. I believe you. Then, I will move right away. I nodded. Maxim climbed on the back of a bone dragon. The creature wouldn't move unless I was the one controlling them. That might have been the case with the Hell Monarch, but I also had the authority of the Dungeon Master. I can practice while waiting. I had entrusted it to him. I decided to act separately while listening to periodic reports. But I wasn't playing around. These mountains were remote with no humans. I would use this opportunity to review my fights with myself. I couldn't pass up this chance. As soon as the creatures left, I found a place where I could concentrate. There was no need to train by moving my body and wielding my sword. I only needed a quiet place to meditate. Maxim separated the 2 bone dragons and used one to raid Aaron's troops. He skillfully attracted the enemies and destroyed them. Only a few creatures could be handled at a time. However, the story was different if he repeated this dozens of times a day. Aaron immediately convened all his troops and chased after Maxim. You are good at running away. The red-faced Aaron shouted at Maxim, who was running away. Maxim didn't stop and quickly disappeared on the bone dragon's back. The speed of the bone dragon exceeded imagination. Once it started flying away, there was no way to catch it. Nevertheless, Maxim didn't allow himself to completely escape. He was luring them somewhere on purpose. In the meantime, the other bone dragon didn't appear. If you are a knight, then face me. Aaron was frustrated every time he nearly caught Maxim. He felt queasy every time he saw Maxim's face. A week passed and Aaron felt desperate. He chased Maxim with his fastest creatures. Naturally, that included the magician of the moon. He was confident that he had enough troops. Maxim deliberately allowed Aaron to catch up with him. Your running ends here. Surrender. Then I will neatly kill you. I will never surrender to you in a million years. Even in a situation like this. You keep mouthing off. It was clear there would be a battle. Thousands of creatures started to attack Maxim and the bone dragon. Aaron pursued Maxim with the Magician of the Moon while the rest of the creatures took on the Bone Dragon and Chaos Soldier. Just before they clashed, Maxim raised his sword and golden light shot into the sky. Sword, Kuong. The sky turned gold and at the same time, a roar was heard from far away. Immediately, a dragon and Chaos Soldier that hadn't been seen before appeared. 2 of each for a total of 4 creatures. It was a small number but their power had doubled. Aaron only chose the quick creatures so the quality wasn't good. Except for the Magician of the Moon, the strength advantage had been reversed. Eek. In contrast, Aaron gritted his teeth. You deal with that dragon. I will take care of him. He wanted to handle Maxim quickly but the situation had changed. It was dangerous for the creatures to deal with the Bone Dragon and Chaos Soldiers. Maxim smiled as he saw the Magician of the Moon leaving. It is going as planned. It was halfway there. The bent-over Magician of the Moon straightened. The person with tangled black hair sprang up towards the sky and revealed 2 completely black eyes. It was like the night had been transferred into his eyes. The face and body were so dried out that it was difficult to tell if the magician was a man or woman. The Magician of the Moon started to rise into the air. Darkness rushed to him and the surrounding area became as clear night. The moon rose in the space and both black eyes began to shine yellow. The Bone Dragon instantly turned around. It noticed that the strongest creature was here. The Magician of the Moon stretched out his hands and the moon shone brighter. Whyang. Light particles gathered at his fingertips. After a moment, the light split into thousands of rays. They were like shooting stars as the rays headed towards the Bone Dragon. Huang. Quarururing. The Bone Dragon breathed out. It was a default skill for a dragon. The dragon's breath was one of the top-ranked skills. It was common for everything in front of the breath to disappear. However, the starlight touched the breath and started to absorb its power. Something unimaginable was happening in front of its eyes. The Bone Dragon noticed the danger, stopped the breath and descended. Creatures ran up to it but the Bone Dragon quickly flapped its wings and left the area of night. The magician followed with an expressionless face. His speed wasn't slower than the Bone Dragon's. A cat and mouse chase. The area of night also moved with him, leaving only slight starlight in his path. The Magician of the Moon didn't care as Aaron got further away. He received only one command. Deal with this Bone Dragon. I was waiting. A signal would eventually reach the top of the mountain. My perception was quite large and I would immediately notice if someone entered the area. Maxim said that he hadn't noticed the Magician of the Moon until he was close. In other words, this was a test. I wondered if I could recognize the night that the Magician of the Moon used. I sat at the top and closed my eyes in meditation. A few days passed as I maintained my position. I just thought that moving my body was training. I had thought that moving my body was the key to becoming stronger. If I didn't do that then I wouldn't become strong. Indeed, it was true to some extent. However, I received some enlightenment from the Tree of Origin. Now just meditating and imagining it was efficient. I could look at myself as objectively as possible and refine my techniques. It was really incredible. I had judged that I couldn't become stronger without raising my stats, but I had gone one step further even with the same stats. No, that wasn't it. I knew it, but I had forgotten. It was in my previous life. Was it before I came to Earth? I knew better than anyone else how the weak could overcome the strong on the battlefield. But after coming to Earth, I had been too focused on the status windows and skills. They were both visible and reliable indicators so I hadn't doubted them. However, my shadow had overwhelmed me with the same stats. I was able to feel the difference between the same stats. I had literally become a slave to the status window. So I had neglected the other half of my development. It was my responsibility. I had to fix it. This feeling is, at that moment, I narrowed my eyes. An alien feeling on my skin. Creepy. I wanted to laugh but didn't. My body had reacted first. It was before I could even consciously think. In this case, it meant only one thing. Meeting a strong enemy. I already met the Grand Dukes and knew how strong they were in my previous life. Their adjusted bodies weren't as good. I was surprised when I met the Fire Spirit King, but he was still within my range to some extent. However, the approaching presence was different. In any case, it had been a pretty long time. It wasn't an overwhelming feeling. It was just different. Everything was different. I couldn't understand it so I frowned. Then I opened my eyes. I looked towards the direction that gave me the alien feeling. He has arrived. Night was approaching from far away. I confirmed it with the naked eye. Perception. Maxim couldn't sense him, but I did. But that was it. I couldn't tell what he was. The weak ability of foresight wasn't any use right now. Therefore, I produced Pride's flames in order to confirm it. Who are you? A magician of the moon who created night. The secret weapon Upa had been hiding was right in front of me. He was fiercely chasing the bone dragon. As he came closer, my surroundings gradually turned into night. However, my eyes were complex as I gazed at him. I couldn't take his measure. Strong, weak, the type of magic power. He seemed to be complete since there was no instability. The flow of magic power from him felt like the beginning when the world was being born. I had never seen that type of magic power before, so I wasn't sure how to judge it. I have to face it. An unknown enemy. If everything was covered in a veil, then I needed to peel it back. If I peeled off even a little bit, then an outline might appear. I raised Wrath and the Emperor's sword. Dark sword. The two swords turned black. I concentrated my magic power on the swords and swung towards the magician. Kawang. A huge explosion occurred that devoured hundreds of meters around it. The explosion expanded and compressed, destroying everything. However, it didn't have an effect on the magician. His hair was just seared a little bit. It didn't make sense. Even I would be a little hurt from that. My eyes went to something behind him. Moon. A large moon was shining brightly. He was also dragging the moon with him. A life vessel? It was sometimes used to save Alicia's life. Many Lich couldn't resist the temptation of immortality, and the life vessel would save their lives. The moon felt similar to a life vessel. But, preparing a separate life vessel reduced the efficiency of the magic power. Strong magic couldn't be used, and if the body was broken, restoration would be very slow. It was destroyed and recovered in an instant. I was convinced the life vessel was the reason. Just before the attack, I confirmed that his body was broken. It was a very short time, but the blow was enough to crush parts of the magician. Regardless of what I thought, regeneration was impossible. However, he was broken and restored simultaneously. It could be called recovery, but it exceeded the normal level of recovery. It was beyond shocking. Then what? I didn't know. That person was really strange. Dark sword made repairing injuries impossible, except for transcendent beings. In other words, that person had entered the realm of transcendence. The magician of the moon glanced at me. I was prepared for an attack from him. He definitely knew I was there after receiving my strike. However, he just passed me like nothing had happened. He only chased after the bone dragon. Was my attack not even on the level of a tickle for him? It was really outrageous. I had never experienced this type of disregard in my previous life. If I attacked, then an opponent had to respond. I grinded my teeth and stared at the moon. If that was really a life vessel, then I couldn't ignore it. The wings made of Pride's flames burned even more intensely. Walls instantly rose up on all sides, but just like a real moon, I couldn't get close to it. I judged that it was disguised as the moon in the area of night, but that wasn't it. This situation, I had wide limits in regards to my common sense. Still, the magician of the moon was beyond these limits. I didn't know and checked the status window. This is the effect of High-End Moon's necklace. When the moon was up, there was an option to increase magic power by 3. This was a real moon? I attacked the moon but couldn't reach it. Tisk. It wasn't something could forcibly capture. I descended. In this time, 1/3 of the bone dragon's wing had disappeared. The bone dragon would soon be destroyed if this continued. I have to hit him. There was no other way. If I destroyed the body several times, then he would eventually reach his limit. Then I would see if he could still ignore me. Paranormal. Paranormal's blessing has been granted. All stats will rise by 2 points for 1 hour. Lightning God. Go and eat. I increased my strength even further. I triggered Dark Sword again around Wrath and the Emperor's sword. I concentrated and added the power of Lightning God. I had never done this before. Now all my different types of powers were gathered around the 2 swords. I aimed the power that was on the verge of exploding at the magician of the moon. He didn't even bother to avoid it. Of course, a huge explosion occurred the moment it hit. Kwang. It was an overwhelming sight that seemed to create a wall between heaven and earth. It was 10 times stronger than my previous attack. I can only use it a few times. I had forced a tremendous amount of magic power into it. There was still some left, but I couldn't afford to recklessly repeat it. So what about this time? The explosion repeatedly expanded and compressed. I wasn't able to confirm the situation inside. Soon, the aftermath of the explosion disappeared and I could see the target. One of his arms had disappeared. To be precise, it was the area where the arm and legs should be. It seemed he restored his body several times before it wasn't as effective. There is an effect. I couldn't be ignored this time. The magician of the moon turned his head and looked at me. Approximately 3 seconds. Then he focused on killing the bone dragon again. I had felt an indescribable feeling when I looked into his eyes. Chapter 197 to 198. World. Let's see how long he can ignore me for. The attack had clearly hurt him, yet the magician had only glanced at me for 3 seconds. In fact, I had never seen this before. I had decided to test him. He didn't even think of avoiding it. That didn't make him difficult. I could simply attack wildly. Wrath and the Emperor's sword were filled with magic power. Due to his regenerative power, it wasn't enough to simply cut his neck. I needed to make a big impact on his body. Shawaruruk. A huge amount of magic power was squeezed out of the swords and rushed towards the magician of the moon. It took a long time. A sigh emerged from my mouth. I didn't move my body, but my magic power was almost depleted. I attacked like crazy for more than an hour. At this point, he couldn't afford to ignore me. His empty eyes moved from the bone dragon towards me. However, the magician of the moon didn't move. Approximately 1/3 of his body had suffered irreparable blows. It was great. To be honest, I couldn't really believe it. So far, I had launched so many direct hits that a seraphim wouldn't be fine. Even the Fire Spirit King and Grand Dukes from my previous life would have disappeared after being hit by such enormous attacks. That was under the assumption that I hit them. Incredibly, the magician of the moon managed to maintain a lot of his body. It seemed like he would only reach his limits after hundreds or maybe thousands of attacks. Who are you? I approached him quietly. The magician of the moon still didn't move. His eyes only faced my direction. I felt like there was a little bit of confusion in his eyes. Perhaps he didn't know how to deal with me. His body was at risk, but he couldn't decide what to do. I heard he is always next to errand. Maybe he was nothing but a puppet following a command. He was ordered to deal with the bone dragon and chased it up to here. Even if I attacked, his order was to exterminate the bone dragon. A doll with strong capabilities. I couldn't imagine how Upa had obtained such an existence. It was impossible through simple summoning. The presence of nothingness, it was completely different from when I met Contigonam. I didn't know if he had similar accomplishments such as raising a tree of origin and upgrading the dungeon to unique, but such events seemed unbelievable. The magician of the moon. The person in front of me was someone who hadn't appeared in my previous life. Dangerous. My instincts warned me. I saw him attack the bone dragon. He wielded the power randomly, so the efficiency wasn't good, but the offensive power of one strike was outstanding. If he had such high regenerative power, then it was no wonder Maxium called him invincible. Even I felt the risk. What if Aaron showed up and commanded him to take care of me? I needed to make a calm judgment. It was advantageous if he kept on moving like a doll. The power of domination isn't acting. I was a threat. He had been in a critical condition many times. However, power of domination didn't show any signs of manifesting at all. It was unlikely that Upa's dominance was greater than mine. It was strange that the power hadn't manifested. It was proof that the existence of the person called the Magician of the Moon was as great as the fire essence with the power of domination. The Great Fire, one of the 9 fires that the fire spirits worshipped. A god of fire to the spirits. They weren't real gods, but some parts were true. When dealing with creatures, many advanced creatures bowed to their power. I have to kill him here, I said in a heavy tone. I couldn't let him go back and add to Upa's power. If I couldn't have him, then I needed to get rid of him now. I gazed at him seriously. Even now, there was a delay in his reaction. He was curious about my sudden appearance. It wasn't impossible to approach him. However, there was confusion in his eyes. This was the first time he had been physically hurt, and he would die if he didn't ignore the command. If he died, then he couldn't kill the bone dragon. The confusion caused him to stop acting altogether. I gathered my magic power. Wrath and the Emperor's sword became overheated, but I didn't stop. The moment when all my magic power was gathered. His eyes changed. I was his pure enemy. It seemed like he realized he had to kill me in order to fulfill the command. It is too late. I was already on the verge of completing my attack. When he realized, Saiyuang, the night that surrounded him was sucked into his body. Only the moon stayed there. The night was sucked in, so I felt like something intense would happen. I struck first. The previous strikes couldn't be compared to the power used now. That attack that contained all my magic power finally reached the magician of the moon. Kuang. It seemed like my whole body was burning up. I opened my eyes to terrible pain and the hot sun. Swak, swak. The sound of rough waves could be heard. After I raised my body with difficulty, I was convinced that this was the beach. Where is this place? However, the beach was unfamiliar to me. The last attack had destroyed the magician of the moon, but the night that he absorbed caused an explosion. It was quite a formidable explosion. Maybe the blast swept me away. All my magic power was depleted, so I fell unconscious after being hit by the blast. I have almost no magic power left. My magic power was empty. It wouldn't recover anytime soon. That meant I couldn't use most of my skills. The depletion of magic power also affected my body, so I wouldn't be as powerful as before. I calmly examined my body's condition. The worst. I would only have the strength to face up to advanced level creatures. I needed to find a place to recover for a while. It was imperative that I restore my magic power. At least I was wearing the Conqueror's Ring. It was an item that recovered magic power by an extra 10% for each territory. According to my estimates, it would take 3 or 4 days to recover all my magic power. Of course, I didn't need to stay here during that period. Yihi. I could communicate with Yihi over a far distance. This was due to Yihi's blessing. I wanted to have Chrisley or Tashmal bring me back. However, the communication didn't reach her. There was no answer from Yihi. Strange. A similar thing had happened in the underground world. Yet the area around me looked like Earth. There wasn't an alien feeling like in the underground world. What to do? At this rate, the world will fall. At that moment, a creature passed me at a tremendous speed. The appearance was similar to a rabbit, but it was approximately 2 meters tall. The pure white fur and red eyes were impressive, but the problem was that it was too fast. It was running past the beach. If it wasn't for my keen eyes, I wouldn't have seen it. The rabbit glanced at me as it ran past. A bug has occurred near 666. Aish, I'm so busy I feel like dying. It left behind those strange words. It disappeared in one direction. I guess I have to follow. I'd never heard of such a creature. It was similar to a creature but didn't give off the same presence. In addition, the rabbit's smell was similar to that of the magician of the moon. If so, this wasn't a normal place. I walked in the direction that the rabbit had disappeared in. Speed, My speed was slow due to my magic power exhaustion, so I naturally frowned. I started to run with just my pure body. This lasted for several hours. The traces of the rabbit were obvious, but it was too far away to be seen. Instead, I saw both familiar and unusual-looking creatures. Areas 811 and 544 have failed. I have to repair them. Go. Giants were moving around carrying hammers. They also didn't see me as I walked past. Large warts were sunbathing while magpie-like birds were pecking at the ground. They were muttering something unknown but didn't acknowledge me when I approached. I tried to touch one but nothing happened. Hey, can't you see me? It was the same when I went up a being that looked like a nose and talked. It didn't pay attention to me at all. It seems like the rabbit is the key. The first rabbit that I saw was the only one who acknowledged me. I left the nose and followed the trail of the rabbit. I ran for a long time. It seemed like I had been running for over 10 hours, but the sky was still the same. This place seemed to have no evening. The strength of my body was still decent, but I couldn't run non-stop. A few hours later, I was able to achieve my goal. Here, a place where the rabbit's traces ended. It was a forest with a small wooden house in the center. I didn't hesitate to enter the house. A crack in area 784 again. Close area 227. Everybody take shelter. Where is teacher? It seemed like a small wooden house. When I walked in, I saw a strange room with no end. A giant rabbit was sitting in front of a screen that was a similar size. It wasn't the rabbit that I had first encountered. My magic power might have been depleted, but I could still smell it. After a while, I was able to find the rabbit holding a notebook in a corner. What to do? I can't do this alone without teacher. Hey, the system is a complete mess. Why is this happening? Who has access to the administrator privileges? I don't have access to it at all. There is no way to repair this. Look at me. Duck. The rabbit's legs thumped strongly. Huh? The rabbit looked at me strangely. At the same time, the rabbit's eyes expanded to twice their size. Why did the bug near Area 666 come here? No, how did you come in? I'm not a bug. The rabbit had said it on the beach, but I didn't like hearing it again. I frowned as the rabbit cocked his head. A bug just called himself a bug. I don't know how he got here, but a strong vaccine should work. The other beings here can't see me. Only you have acknowledged me. Tell me, who are you and what is this place? Vaccine. The rabbit turned his head and shouted loudly. He waited a while but nothing happened. The rabbit looked at me with very confused eyes. Why isn't there a vaccine reaction? Wait, only I can see you? I folded my arms and watched the rabbit's next movements. I judged that the rabbit didn't have the power to threaten me. I was still weak because my magic power wasn't entirely restored, but I could cope. Then the rabbit's eyes narrowed. He gazed closely at the top of my head. No ID. What are you if you're not a bug? Randolph Briggseel, a demon. I waited as he panicked. Now I introduced myself first. Demon? Teacher mentioned it a few times. But how did you travel here from the demon world? Wasn't teacher the one who devised this program? Let's see. He searched around his long white ears before grabbing some glasses. The rabbit put on the glasses and started to gesture in the air. It seemed like he was dancing alone. He seemed like a crazy guy. Forced intrusion from the outside has been blocked. A message popped out in front of me. At the same time, smoke was emitted from the glasses worn by the rabbit. The rabbit quickly took off his glasses. This program? Isn't it different? Moreover, the security level, it is over teacher's level. Unbelievable. Both eyes were shocked. His mouth dropped wide open and he looked at me with disbelief. The horror in his eyes changed to amazement. It would be very scary if you were a virus from outside. Disabling the vaccine and only recognizing me as a part administrator, maybe I might have already been infected. I don't know what you're talking about. I really didn't know. I had heard similar words from humans, but that was all. You are called Randolph Briggseel? Can I hear where you came from? The voice of the rabbit was desperate. There has to be some give and take. You know me, but I have no idea who you are. I'm sorry. My ID is 0001. I am the administrator of the reverse world. The reverse world? The rabbit nodded and said, the moon. We call it the rear of the moon. After a brief introduction from 0001, I was guided into a small room. The room was filled with moonlight and a map of the universe. You came from Earth? I'm sorry. I really thought you were a program. Anyway, is this the Earth that you were referring to? 0001 pointed to one area of the map of the universe. He tapped his index finger a few times, causing the map of the universe to expand and a blue planet to appear. It seems correct. Really? Right here. It is difficult. Difficult? This is a planet that the administrators can't interfere with. It is a rule passed down from the top administrators. 1. It has been 5 Earth years? A little over 5 years. It overlapped with the period when the demons came to Earth. I narrowed my eyes and asked, what administrator are you specifically talking about? Gods. Gods. I didn't understand at first. 0001 referred to himself as an administrator. He didn't feel like a god at all. The gods also have ranks. In this case, teacher, who manages this world, is the middle administrator. I am only teacher's assistant. I'm not a god. I nodded and 0001 continued. At any rate, the middle administrators are assigned a world. They make sure that the rules of the world don't collapse. In contrast, the top administrators don't allow us to engage directly or indirectly with Earth. What about the location of the devil Death Bringer? For me, the story of gods was like catching floating clouds. After I said the name of the devil, 0001 responded kindly. A devil would be one of the top administrators. That's right. It was a devil who forcibly removed Earth from our jurisdiction. The name was, yes, Deathbringer. There was some opposition, but the low-level administrators were forced to proceed. 0001 closed his mouth. He stared at my face blankly like he was worried about something. And you came from Earth. Is this related to teacher's disappearance? Who is this teacher you are referring to? The reverse world's top administrator. 2 months ago he suddenly disappeared. As soon as teacher disappeared, someone else got administrative permissions and this world became a complete mess. We can't do anything because of it. 0001 had a grim expression on his face. I touched my jaw. 0001 said that this was a world behind the moon. The moon, and the administrator disappeared. The time and place oddly coincided. Above all, there was a smell similar to the magician of the moon coming from 0001. I might have met the one you call teacher. What? He used the power of the moon. He always had night around him, and despite destroying his body hundreds of times, it was regenerated instantaneously. Then he sucked all of the night inside him. That's right, teacher. When teacher is in a bad mood, he will suck the night in. There is no night here now that teacher isn't present. He took it all. By the way, teacher's body was destroyed? Even with some information missing, 0001 was convinced. Then was the magician of the moon a god? It wasn't easy to believe. I couldn't understand why a god would be wandering around in such a manner. What was Upa doing? However, if he was a god, then his nonsensical regenerative power would make sense. He was being manipulated by another demon. He was a doll that lost all sense of self and just followed orders. I fought him because he was hostile and tried to destroy him, but failed. After the last confrontation, I woke up on the beach. Being able to fight evenly with a god, what a great guy. If you collect his divine essence, then won't you be able to become a god? Envious, not. Wait, what? Teacher was being manipulated? 0001 showed signs of confusion. He was being manipulated by another demon. An immortal being controlled by a mortal? No way. It goes against the rules of the world. The gods wouldn't allow it. I recalled the time when I returned to the past. All the gods of Earth were sealed. The devil Deathbringer used this. He created dungeons in the places where the gods were sealed and invited demons there. All the gods were sealed, so there was no one maintaining the rules of Earth. Except for the devil Deathbringer. However, there were no sanctions against him. The devil wasn't bound by the rules. I had no idea what Deathbringer was hoping for. What to do? I have to find teacher. Return me to Earth, then I will kill the demon controlling him. I would remove both Erend and Upa. It would benefit me to kill both of them. However, 0001 shook his head. It's not that simple. It has infiltrated this world and contaminated teacher. It won't be enough. Immortal? How is it possible? I wonder if the crack was the problem. The crack? About 2 years ago, the program made a mistake and opened the crack. It was a chance for the world to be exposed for 100 years. After a second, I dealt with it. I searched through all the systems. There were no problems, but maybe something happened during that 1 second. No, does that make sense? 01's body trembled. His shoulders became heavier at the thought that it was his fault his teacher was being manipulated. The rabbit bit his fingers. No, it was connected to the nothingness. There was only access to the nothingness for 1 second. It isn't possible that a mortal from Earth used that 1 second. The existence of nothingness isn't really known in the first place. Approximately 2 years ago, and nothingness. It was somehow familiar. I was very familiar with it. It was the period when Contigonam was summoned and eliminated. A being from the nothingness that I had never heard of had been summoned to Earth. The probability isn't 0 at all. I guess, it can't be helped. I need to stop teacher first. The rabbit went to a corner of the room and pulled out an arrow from a drawer. It is a request. This vaccine can save teacher. Otherwise the world will be finished. It was a seemingly normal arrow. I was suddenly curious and used mind's eye. Interpreting the program. Interpretation is complete. Name. Moon arrow. Legend. Description. An arrow formed from the strong condensation of the moon's aura. Contains the god's blessing and grace. It is enough to call it the clone of the gods of the moon. Asterisk all stats +2 when held, can pierce through all boundaries. Asterisk there is a completely different effect depending on the opponent that is pierced. Legend. It was the first time I got my hands on something with that rating. I had seen it a few times but never touched it. I encountered it in a totally unexpected place. I'll make the passage. The passage will go from the demon world to Earth. Passage from the demon world? I wondered if that was really necessary. 0001 saw my expression and explained. I get the code for the passage from your body. Aren't you originally from the demon world? You won't be able to go straight through. If my thoughts are correct, certain conditions are needed before you can move to Earth. If you go from the demon world, then those conditions aren't necessary. It makes sense since that is your original region. 0001 took out another pair of glasses. After putting them on, he moved his fingers and spoke. Please wait a few days. It shouldn't take that long. TL note. The Korean word for the devil, when used in regards to Deathbringer, is different from the word used for Randolph's goal. I've translated them both as devil, but if I could go back, then I would probably make Randolph's goal as Demon King, rather than devil, just to make the distinction more clear. Chapter 199 to 200. Meeting the Messengers. 3 days after, I was able to return thanks to 0001. My experience there was very unusual and I was able to learn a little bit about the gods. There were regulations and rules, but the current situation on Earth was a little bit different. But that didn't change my mindset. My purpose was to become the Demon King and take out all enemies blocking my path. I learned that the magician of the moon was called Gustarte. He was a god, but now he was just a doll underneath a demon. If the moon arrow didn't work, then there was no way to get rid of Gustarte. I would do the minimum to keep my promise, but I wouldn't hesitate to kill Gustarte. Killing a god. I never thought I would say such a thing. A demon killing a god. How funny. It was a mythical feat that only existed in the books. I couldn't help laughing as I imagined my name in there. I also set up some plans. Gustarte couldn't fully use his powers. He was designed to follow orders completely. If conflicting commands emerged, then he would become very confused. He even stopped moving for a while. The advent of the Seraphim was still far away and a powerful enemy was right in front of me. Gustarte. If he didn't want to die, then he should stop being a doll. Once I reached the ground again, the world was dark. A clear evening. I was able to land precisely where the collision had occurred. The surrounding area was a mess. All the structures were destroyed and there were numerous holes in the ground. It was to the point of becoming dizzy as the holes seemed to go on endlessly. This magic power. I sensed many creatures and demons. It was imperative that I get out of here. I have to find Maxium. The dark night. I dashed out of the area quickly. It wasn't difficult to find Maxium because the place to meet up had been predetermined. There was a small island near Recife, Brazil, where the Bone Dragons, Chaos Soldiers and Maxium were waiting while hiding. Oh, Your Majesty. Maxium appeared as soon as I opened my magic power and revealed my presence. He was very pleased as he quickly kneeled down. I've been waiting for you. Maxium had many injuries. It showed how intense the fight was. However, it wasn't over yet. Rather than praising him, I asked, have you taken care of Erend? I'm sorry. He bought time due to the reinforcement of other demons. I crushed that mouth, but I nodded. Maxium decided that destroying Erend's mouth would stop him from giving any more orders. It was a decent enough merit. Then the magician of the moon is with Erend. That isn't necessarily true. It's not? I looked at Maxium with surprise. The explosion seemed like the world was collapsing. It was an explosion caused by Your Majesty and the magician of the moon. Shortly afterwards, I went to the area, but Your Majesty and the magician has disappeared. Just in case, I kept an eye on Erend but didn't see the magician of the moon around him. Maxium didn't do things carelessly. He was confident, so it was highly likely that his words were true. The magician of the moon had disappeared. I touched my jaw. The plan will be modified. Don't worry about Erend. Erend? Then no, this time I will go forward. At the same time, Maxium's eyes shook. Quote ellipsis ellipsis exclamation mark. Is it because I didn't do it fast enough? My abilities might be lacking, but please give me a final chance. Kung. Maxium bumped his head against the ground several times as he bowed. It wasn't my intention, but that was what it sounded like to Maxium. I had a different purpose. I was waiting for Upa and Ariel to meet each other. And I also needed to handle Gustarte. If I dealt with Aaron, then Gustarte might show up. At that time, I would need to deal with Gustarte. The problem was still Upa. He might move. Of course, I didn't intend on showing up directly at Aaron's dungeon. I simply had to turn Upa's attention away. He absolutely couldn't pay attention to Aaron. In order to do so, I needed to use some tactics. A meeting. A gathering of Grand Dukes. After a series of invitations, they would gather in neutral territory to talk or provoke each other. They might ignore the invitation, but it was worth trying. They will be quite curious. Upa and Pandemonium especially would have questions. I could sound them out and pick up information, so it would be killing two birds with one stone. Conversely, they would try to get information from me, but that conflict wouldn't be so bad. I will leave attacking Aaron's dungeon to you. I will also tell you how to check for the Magician of the Moon. Quote ellipsis ellipsis exclamation mark. New Maxium, I will do my best. The shaking stopped as he felt relieved. I looked down at Maxium. While in the reverse world, I thought of a way to tie up Gustarte's feet. There was a way to handle Aaron and tie up Gustarte. Once the meeting was over, I would be in an ideal position to deal with it. Yeehee, the fairy's blessing. It didn't work in the reverse world, but this was Earth. After a while, Yeehee's clear voice rang in my head. Yes, Master. Yeehee is working hard right now. There is work to do. Yes, Master. Yeehee is working hard right now. My eyes narrowed. It was the same answer. Her voice was oddly slack. I spoke in a grave voice. Have Oswin create 4 invitations. They should be completed by the time I get back. Hup. Why Yeehee? Yeehee wasn't sleeping. Invitations? I'll tell him. But what invitations? He just needs to make them? They will be delivered to the Grand Dukes. I will take care of the words. Feel free to spend on the necessary materials. Yep. I stopped the communication after hearing Yeehee's reply. You couldn't find any footprints left behind by the Magician of the Moon? Yes, Your Majesty. By the time I arrived, they had already vanished. Then I guess I have to go back. I will start to attack Aaron's dungeon. He desired my recognition. A burning will filled his eyes. However, I shook my head. No, you will be coming with me. Huh? Don't you need new equipment? Ah, Maxium was greatly impressed. He was using equipment from the underground world. The equipment itself was excellent, but it had clearly been through a lot. Both the armor and helmet. They were rusty and had holes in several places, making the defense poor. It had a lot of options, but there was better equipment in the dungeon. Let's go. I boarded the bone dragon with Maxium following behind me. And the Chaos soldiers started moving the other bone dragon. It felt like a returning tide. When I arrived back at the dungeon, Oswin and Yeehee were waiting for me. The invitations were completed. Will this be enough? I received the invitations that Oswin gave me and examined them. The most impressive thing was that there was a little bit of orichalcum powder. Stars surrounding Wrath and the Emperor's sword were drawn on either side of the invitation. The space to write the contents was red and very provocative, so I liked it. They were magnificent invitations with no flaws. Excellent. Thank you. Yeehee. Call Chrisley and Julium. I will be next to the dungeon core. I understand. Yeehee. Yeehee will go call them right now. Yeehee flapped her wings and flew into the dungeon. It seemed like she was going to convey it directly. Now, I need to decide what the contents should be. It was the reason why I called Chrisley and Julium. The contents of the invitation. I didn't know how to write an invitation, so I would receive the help of 2 intelligent people. The Grand Duke's participation would depend on the invitation that was created. Chrisley, Julium and I sat next to the dungeon core and created the contents of the invitation. First, we need to be sure of the purpose for the meeting. Julium said. I replied without hesitation. On the surface, it is to exchange information about the angels. However, since Okulos, all the Grand Dukes have had an agenda. It is certain for Upa and Pandemonium. I don't know anything about Ariel, but it is likely. Put a phrase to imply that Pandemonium had taken Okuyo's demons. Upa had made Gustarte his doll. Ariel might be orchestrating things that weren't obvious. No matter how pure she was still a demon. It will be somewhat provocative. How about using a poem? Chrisley commented. I started laughing. I don't know if the Grand Dukes have such an elegant hobby. Demons reading poetry. I had never heard or seen it. If it was Ariel, she might have a basic degree of literacy. My dungeon master. Even so, it would be good to decorate it with poetry. Is the invitation not sent in good faith? That's right. Rather than good, it is full of evil. Besides, it was to subtly threaten them. I knew the dungeon locations of the Grand Dukes. I could only give them the invitation if I knew the locations. That itself was a provocation. Julian then spoke. If you want them to participate, then it is good to mention something like their weaknesses. Weaknesses. Emphasize that if they don't participate, the information might leak to others. It doesn't have to be big. I didn't know every detail about the Grand Dukes. I only knew a few facts from my previous life. I can throw in a few of those facts. I didn't need big facts. I nodded. I will allow it. Chrisley and I have discussed the contents. I will write it right in front of you, so please give advice. Understood. I was new to poems. I had never read them. There were few demons with such an elegant hobby. Before long, Julian and Chrisley wrote down the contents of the invitation. Upa, one of the 4 major Grand Dukes who had the title Destroyer. He had decorated his dungeon as a castle and was reigning over it. He didn't spare any effort to recreate the huge castle, Bulanon, from the demon world. Thanks to this, his dungeon always had a dreary atmosphere. The long displays of black armor, paintings and swords that decorate the wall contributed to the atmosphere. The bloated body and hair that soared into the sky. On the contrary, the pair of eyes looking forward had no sense of companionship. The home of a Grand Duke. What do you think, Chrisley? 2 people were standing in front of Upa. Chrisley and Oswin. Both of them came to Upa's dungeon. Chrisley nodded slightly. She wasn't familiar with places like this. On the other hand, Oswin's body relaxed like he had calmed down. I am Oswin. We have come here as Grand Duke Randolph Brigseal's messengers. How funny. Grand Duke Randolph Brigseal. Upa's expression of dissatisfaction was strong. He was sitting on a huge chair made of bones and looking down at them. Key. A long red carpet extended down the stairs and there were creatures slobbering all around them. Depending on Upa's mood, the creatures would bare their teeth. There were at least over 1,000 and they seemed to be at the advanced level. In addition, the ambient temperature around Oswin and Chrisley rose sharply. It was so hot that Chrisley's face became red. Upa's fingers moved subtly as he controlled the space. Then Oswin came forward. We are messengers. It is our task to hand over Grand Duke Randolph Brigseal's invitation. Is Grand Duke Upa afraid of some messengers? What are your justifications? I don't remember inviting you. Furthermore, Randolph Brigseal and I have a strictly adversarial relationship. Duck. Upa's hand movements started becoming faster. It was proof that he wasn't in a good mood. If they made one wrong move here, then they could lose their heads. Oswin couldn't help but tense up. Thank you for meeting us. If there wasn't a reason, then we wouldn't be standing here now. But I am confident that the invitation we brought is enough to receive us. At the very least, you won't receive any damage. This was a dungeon. They would need to deal with the creatures. No matter how strong Chrisley and Oswin were, there was a limit. Furthermore, in order to reduce the damage as messengers, they needed to contact Upa convincingly. Upa had questions for them. Randolph Brigseal has sent some messengers? It wouldn't hurt to meet them once. His thoughts were up to here. By the way, he wouldn't let them live after the meeting. Oswin and Chrisley both sensed Upa's intent. They could only hope that the invitation saved them. But Oswin was consistent in his attitude. Another person receiving an invitation at the same time. I know that you are at war with Ariel. Upa tapped his chin a few times. I knew he was just quietly waiting for the results, but, Tisk, I'll see you once. Bring them. Upa had anticipated that there would be a rush to feed on the winner after the war between him and Ariel finished. But he hadn't imagined that an invitation would be sent the moment the war was paused. Oswin climbed the stairs with the invitation. He reached midway when a lich popped out and blocked his path. What? Invitation. Inspect. It was to check if anything had been done to the invitation. Oswin frowned and handed over the invitation. The lich used a special mirror and chanted a few spells before nodding and handing the invitation to Upa. Quack. Upa opened the sealed invitation. He quickly started reading the contents. A brief moment of silence. Oswin and Chrisley watched with casual expressions, but they actually felt like they were walking on eggshells. No matter how confident they were, it was impossible to stop Upa if he wanted their heads. They had very little chances of surviving. Quack. Upa's face became harder the more he read. Power entered his hands and the invitation was destroyed. Randolph Briggseel, Quadaduke. Upa gritted my teeth. Like an active volcano was erupting. His red eyes glared at Oswin as he burst out. Tell him that I will participate. And, I won't fall for this cheap taunt. Tell Randolph Briggseel that I will take his head along with Ariel's. Upa turned his head away. It was a declaration that this had ended. However, the words, tell him, implied that they would leave here alive. Oswin and Chrisley looked at each other. Oswin instantly drew a V in the air with his fingers. The griffin flew over to them. Chrisley and Oswin climbed on top of it. Upa's personality is just like Dungeon Master said. It was a fierce confrontation. Chrisley spoke. The two of them had been roaming the world to extend invitations to the Grand Dukes. But it wasn't that easy to meet them. The Grand Dukes had the strongest dungeons among all the demons. Bringing an invitation didn't mean they could meet the Grand Duke. They had only met Upa so far out of all the Grand Dukes, but their expressions weren't that good. They had come to the dungeon as messengers, and there were many twists and turns before they could meet Upa. There were many opportunities to die. He was scary. If it wasn't for the contents of the invitation, he would have tried to get rid of us. Actually, there is someone behind us right now. Upa wasn't a demon who could pretend to be magnanimous. He didn't hide his desire to kill them. If they had done something wrong, then Upa would have cut off their heads. He wants to figure out the location of the dungeons from us. It is difficult. We need to hand over the invitation. Wyvern King. The creature was following behind the griffin. It was keeping a distance but couldn't avoid Oswin and Chrisley's senses. Upa knew that they were meeting Ariel and had sent the King Wyvern after them. Upa and Ariel were at war, so it was natural that they wanted to figure out the location of the dungeons. Speed up. The griffin flapped its wings harder. The King Wyvern soon disappeared and Oswin muttered, I hope that Ariel Diablo is a nicer demon. My heart is pounding. I will do the next one. Chrisley had been quiet when they met Upa. It was because she didn't have a lot of experience with situations like that. She didn't want to make any mistakes, so she decided to learn from Oswin. Ariel Diablo and most of her demons were located in North America. Ariel's dungeon was in the United States, but recently she had been running 2 dungeons. Greenland, the largest island in the world. More than 80% of the land was covered in ice. Originally it belonged to a marquis in Upa's faction, but Ariel got her hands on it. It seemed like she quite liked the ice-covered land. Thanks to that, Chrisley and Oswin had to travel to Greenland. It was more tightly guarded than North America, so they had to use considerable effort to fly over it. There are almost no gaps. Oswin couldn't help feeling admiration. Ariel's demons were all following a strategy. They were called the Grand Duke's Knights. Watchtowers were installed on paths where the enemy could move. There were also large creatures surrounding the watchtowers. How do we arrive? Chrisley asked while sweating. There were magic items and stealth scrolls packed. The griffin couldn't be caught in the air, but it was hard to get rid of enemies that covered the land. It seems like I am destined not to live. Oswin shook his head. His body was already dead, but he sighed at the thought of dealing with all these creatures. They were piled up like a mountain. Kuang. The equipment to repel the curse was almost reaching a breakthrough as well. It will be fortunate if I can come back alive.